In the late 18th century, in the vast untamed lands of the American West, a child was born whose name would come to symbolize endurance and quiet strength. Sacagawea was born around 1788, amidst the rugged beauty of the Wind River Mountains, a place where the Shoshone people had lived for centuries. Her early years unfolded in the wilderness, where the landscape was both harsh and beautiful, and life was shaped by the rhythms of nature and the customs of her people. As the world around her began to change, as European settlers and explorers began to push further west, Sacagawea's life would take an unexpected turn, drawing her into the currents of history. Her story is intertwined with the Lewis and Clark expedition, one of the most significant undertakings in the exploration of the American frontier. Yet, Sacagawea was not an explorer in the conventional sense. She did not seek fame, nor did she set out to become a hero. Instead, she quietly played an indispensable role in one of the most remarkable journeys in American history, guiding a group of explorers through the wilderness with wisdom that came from her deep connection to the land. As we begin this journey through her life, we step softly through time, listening to the echoes of a woman whose legacy remains quietly enduring. If you find yourself enjoying this story, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing where you're listening from, so others may also join in the quiet exploration of history. Let us now turn the pages of her life. Sacagawea's life began in the expansive and rugged wilderness of the American West, a land rich with natural beauty but also fraught with hardship. She was born around 1788, near what is now the Wind River Mountains in present-day Wyoming, although the exact location of her birth remains uncertain. As a member of the Shoshone tribe, Sacagawea's early years were marked by a close connection to the land, a deep knowledge of the flora and fauna that surrounded her, and a sense of community with her people. The Shoshone were a nomadic tribe, living in small bands and migrating according to the seasons. They hunted bison, gathered roots, and fished in the rivers that cut through the high deserts and lush valleys of the West. This environment, harsh and unforgiving though it might seem, was home to Sacagawea, a place where survival depended on understanding the natural world and knowing how to live in harmony with it. The rhythms of life for Sacagawea and her family were shaped by the land itself. As a child, she would have learned to travel across great distances, moving from place to place as her people sought sustenance and shelter. The history of the Shoshone people is ancient, their ways rooted in deep traditions that spoke of respect for nature, the spiritual world, and the roles each person played within the tribe. Sacagawea, like other children of her tribe, was raised with these teachings, to know the land and how to care for it, to speak the Shoshone language and understand the stories passed down from generation to generation. Her early life would have been filled with the sights, sounds, and rhythms of a world unspoiled by the modern changes soon to come. Her family, like many Native American families at the time, lived on the edge of what was becoming an increasingly complex and dangerous world. In the late 18th century, the United States was expanding westward, driven by the idea of manifest destiny, the belief that the nation was destined to spread across the continent. The land that Sacagawea and her people knew so well was soon to become the focus of a great deal of interest and conflict. But these were changes that Sacagawea could not have foreseen in her early years, when the world seemed as large and as endless as the land itself. By the time Sacagawea was about 12 years old, the world around her began to shift dramatically. In 1800, when Sacagawea was still a young girl, a group of Lakota Sioux warriors attacked a Shoshone band. During the attack, Sacagawea was captured, along with several other young people from her tribe. The raiders were part of a larger group that sought to control the trade routes and territories of the High Plains. Sacagawea's capture marked a turning point in her life, one that would lead her far from her homeland and set her on a path that would intersect with the most significant expedition of its time, Taken from her family, Sacagawea was forced to travel with the Lakota to their village, where she was eventually traded to a group of Hidatsa people, a tribe living near the present-day Missouri River in what is now North Dakota. The journey to this new land was long and difficult. Sacagawea was separated from her people, taken into a foreign world where the customs and language of the Hidatsa were entirely different from those she had known. This period of her life must have been filled with loss, confusion, and a profound sense of displacement. Yet Sacagawea's strength and resilience began to emerge even in this dark period. She was not the first member of her tribe to be captured, nor would she be the last. Many of the children captured in such raids became valuable commodities in the complex world of fur trading and indigenous diplomacy. Sacagawea, like others before her, had to adapt quickly to her new circumstances. It was in the Hidatsa Mandan villages that Sacagawea's life would intersect with a man named Toussaint Charbonneau, a French-Canadian fur trapper. Charbonneau, who had established a life among the Hidatsa, took Sacagawea as his wife, although their relationship was more out of necessity than love. The union was not one of mutual respect or affection, but rather one of survival. Charbonneau, already a well-established member of the fur trade community, had a reputation for being skilled but not overly respected. Sacagawea, as a young woman, found herself in a marriage that was likely driven by circumstances more than personal choice. In the midst of these personal upheavals, Sacagawea's fate would once again be shaped by the broader currents of history. In 1804, a new chapter in her life would begin, as the Lewis and Clark expedition made its way westward across the continent. This would be the defining moment of Sacagawea's life, an event that would bring her to the forefront of American history, though she would never seek fame or recognition. Her role in this expedition, though largely unspoken, would be essential to its success. Sacagawea's story is one of quiet endurance, of a young woman who faced unimaginable hardships and found ways to adapt to an ever-changing world. From the peaceful lands of the Shoshone to the uncertainty of her capture and eventual marriage to Charbonneau, Sacagawea's early years were filled with challenges that would prepare her, unknowingly, for the journey that lay ahead. The strength she showed in these early years, in the face of loss and displacement, would be the foundation for the remarkable role she would come to play in one of America's greatest historical undertakings. As we continue through Sacagawea's story, we can see how the pieces of her life slowly come together, forming the quiet yet essential role she would play in the exploration of the American West. This chapter, like the others that follow, will reveal the resilience and determination that defined Sacagawea's character, qualities that allowed her to face each challenge with a quiet strength that would become her legacy. In the year 1800, when Sacagawea was still in her early teens, the course of her life took a dramatic and irreversible turn. At the time, the Shoshone people, like many indigenous groups of the American West, lived in a delicate balance with both the land and the various tribes surrounding them. These were lands where travel between nations, trade, and diplomacy were central to survival, but they were also places marked by tension and conflict. During this period, the Shoshone tribe faced increasing pressure from neighboring groups seeking to expand their territories or control trade routes that passed through Shoshone land. In 1800, a raid from the Lakota Sioux shattered the peace Sacagawea and her people had known. The Lakota, a powerful tribe of the Great Plains, attacked Sacagawea's band, capturing several individuals, including the young girl herself. Sacagawea's capture was not an isolated event. It was part of the complex patterns of intertribal conflict and trade that shaped the lives of indigenous peoples during this era. Many tribes, including the Shoshone, were forced into difficult choices as they navigated the shifting political landscape of the American West. To survive, they often had to rely on alliances with other tribes or face the threat of invasion or assimilation. Sacagawea was taken from her family and forced to travel far from the place of her birth. She, along with other captives, was brought across the plains, moving westward, far from her people and her home. The journey would have been long and difficult, filled with hardship. Sacagawea, young and vulnerable, would have experienced deep feelings of loss, confusion, and fear during this time. The people she'd known, the language she spoke, and the land she had walked upon all seemed distant and irretrievable. After travelling for an unknown period, Sacagawea, along with other members of her captured group, was eventually traded to a different tribe, the Hidatsa. The Hidatsa people lived near the confluence of the Missouri and Knife Rivers in present-day North Dakota. The Hidatsa were part of a larger trading network, and they, along with their neighbours, the Mandan, played a significant role in the trade systems of the American West. This was a culture that understood the value of the fur trade and had established a relationship with French-Canadian trappers who often came to the area to exchange goods. For Sacagawea, life with the Hidatsa was another challenge she had to endure. She had been removed from her Shoshone roots and thrust into a new world. The customs of the Hidatsa were unfamiliar to her, and their language was completely different. The patterns of daily life, the ways of thinking and living were all foreign to her. Yet, Sacagawea's resilience began to show itself. As she adapted to her new life, she would have learned the ways of the Hidatsa, understanding their customs and engaging with their complex social structures. During this time, Sacagawea also learned a new trade, the art of survival in a fur trading economy. She would have learned how to handle goods, barter, and interact with the European traders who passed through the area. It was an education she likely never imagined for herself in the mountains of her youth. Despite the hardship, Sacagawea's resilience allowed her to navigate this new life with determination. Her adaptability would become one of the key traits that would later benefit her during the Lewis and Clark expedition. Yet, at the time, it must have seemed that Sacagawea was bound in this new life with no clear way to return to her people, the Shoshone. Her heart must have longed for the familiar landscapes and ways of her tribe. But Sacagawea had been forced into a new reality, one shaped by forces beyond her control. It was during her time with the Hidatsa that Sacagawea's life would once again intersect with the world of European settlers and explorers. In the early 1800s, the United States, under the leadership of President Thomas Jefferson, was becoming increasingly interested in exploring the western frontier. Jefferson believed that the future of the nation lay in expanding westward, seeking new trade routes and establishing American influence in territories previously controlled by European powers. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark were tasked with a monumental mission: to lead an expedition to explore the western part of the continent, mapping out new territory and establishing relationships with indigenous peoples. The Lewis and Clark expedition would eventually become one of the most important explorations in American history. But at the time, the team was still in its early planning stages. In the fall of 1804, the expedition passed through the Hidatsa Mandan villages. It was here that Sacagawea's life would take yet another turn. She was married to a French-Canadian fur trapper named Toussaint Charbonneau, who had also settled in the Hidatsa village. Charbonneau, while a skilled trapper, was not highly regarded by the local indigenous people. His reputation was one of opportunism, and he was known more for his ability to talk to the French traders than for any real strength of character. When Lewis and Clark arrived in the Hidatsa Mandan villages, they were in need of an interpreter and guide who could assist them in navigating the vast unknown lands that lay ahead. Charbonneau, who spoke some of the local languages, was hired for his ability to communicate with the tribes. He was not a man of great importance, but his wife, Sacagawea, would prove to be the key to the expedition's success. Sacagawea had learned multiple languages during her time in the Hidatsa village. Her fluency in both the Shoshone and Hidatsa languages, along with her understanding of the local geography, made her an invaluable asset to the expedition. Though Charbonneau was technically the hired interpreter, It was Sacagawea who would guide them through many difficult moments. She too was hired as a guide, though her true value would not be fully realized until much later. Sacagawea's journey from her peaceful early years to the hardships of capture and forced migration set her on a path that would intersect with some of the most important historical events in the young United States. Her life had been shaped by loss, hardship, and adaptation, but her story was far from over. As the Lewis and Clark expedition set off across the vast unknown territories, Sacagawea's quiet strength and deep knowledge of the land would guide them through some of the most challenging moments of their journey. In the years following Sacagawea's capture by the Lakota Sioux, her life had taken unexpected turns. Stripped from the familiar surroundings of her Shoshone people, she was thrust into a new life with the Hidatsa tribe, and eventually became the wife of Toussaint Charbonneau. Charbonneau, a French-Canadian fur trapper, had established himself in the Hidatsa Mandan villages, an area known for its central role in the fur trade. Though their union was not one of love, it was, like many alliances of the time, based on the necessity of survival and the practicalities of life in a volatile world. Charbonneau himself was a figure not widely respected, though he possessed certain useful skills. He was known for his ability to communicate in several languages, which made him valuable in the trading communities along the Missouri River. He could converse with French traders, as well as the various Native American tribes who lived in the region. Despite his usefulness, Charbonneau was not held in high regard among the Hidatsa or the Mandan. His skills in languages, though valuable, did not extend beyond basic communication, and he was often seen as opportunistic. Sacagawea's relationship with Charbonneau was one shaped by circumstance. While it's unclear whether their marriage was one of mutual affection or one born out of necessity, it is known that Sacagawea's resilience would not only see her through the challenges of her captivity, but would also shape the way she approached the challenges of her new life with Charbonneau. Despite the hardships of their relationship, Sacagawea was learning the ways of a world that was foreign to her, one filled with French traders, new languages, and complex social dynamics. Though Sacagawea's life with Charbonneau was, by all accounts, one of hardship, it was also during this time that her skills began to grow. In the Hidatsa Mandan villages, Sacagawea learned how to navigate the intricacies of trade and diplomacy, gaining an understanding of the power dynamics between native tribes and European settlers. Her fluency in multiple languages, Shoshone, Hidatsa, and perhaps others, would prove invaluable, as these skills would allow her to communicate with various groups and form relationships that could aid her survival and the survival of her family. It was in the midst of this world of trade and shifting allegiances that Sacagawea's life would once again intersect with history. In 1804, as the Lewis and Clark expedition began its preparations, the expedition's leaders, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, sought out guides and interpreters to accompany them on their journey. The goal of their mission was to explore the western territories of the United States, which had been acquired through the Louisiana Purchase. Their task was monumental: to map uncharted territory, establish diplomatic relations with Native American tribes, and assess the natural resources of the land. At this point, Sacagawea had no inkling that her path would cross with that of these two men, whose names would become synonymous with American exploration. However, Lewis and Clark were in need of an interpreter, someone who could speak the languages of the tribes they would encounter along the way. They also needed a guide who knew the land and its people, someone who could help them navigate the dangerous wilderness that lay ahead. Charbonneau, who had spent time with the Hidatsa, was recommended for the role of interpreter. Although not an ideal candidate, he was the best option available. In turn, Charbonneau's wife, Sacagawea, was also brought into the fold. Her role, however, would not be defined by mere coincidence. While Charbonneau was hired for his linguistic abilities, it was Sacagawea's deep knowledge of the land, her fluency in several languages, and her ability to navigate the social dynamics of the tribes they would encounter that made her a valuable asset to the expedition. When Lewis and Clark met Sacagawea, they would have recognized the quiet strength in her demeanor, though it is unlikely they fully understood the significance of the role she would come to play in the expedition's success. Sacagawea, though young and still learning how to navigate this complex world of European trade and diplomacy, had a deep understanding of the land and the people who lived on it. She was also a mother, a young woman with a child of her own, Jean-Baptiste, born in 1805, whom she would carry with her on the journey. Her determination to protect her son and her ability to balance motherhood with the demands of her environment would play a pivotal role in her contributions to the expedition. Though Sacagawea's role in the expedition was not one of formal leadership or command, her presence would prove crucial. She was a bridge between two worlds, the indigenous tribes of the West who had long lived in these lands, and the European explorers who sought to understand and control them. Her ability to speak to Native American groups, her deep knowledge of the geography of the region, and her steady resilience in the face of hardship all contributed to the success of the Lewis and Clark expedition. As the expedition set out from the Mandan Hidatsa villages in the spring of 1805, Sacagawea would soon show her true value. She knew how to gather plants for food and medicine, identify landmarks, and communicate with various tribes along the way. Her expertise in navigating the terrain and interacting with indigenous peoples would help the expedition avoid conflicts and establish necessary alliances. Sacagawea's role was never one of prominence in the official records of the expedition, but her contributions were immeasurable. She acted as both an interpreter and a guide, helping Lewis and Clark navigate the terrain and communicating with the tribes they encountered. Her quiet presence, her steady guidance, and her determination to see the journey through all played a significant role in the success of the expedition. In the spring of 1805, as the Lewis and Clark expedition prepared to leave the Mandan Hidatsa villages and push further into the unknown reaches of the American West, Sacagawea's journey would evolve from a quiet observer to an active participant in one of the most important explorations in American history. The decision to join the expedition would be one that shaped not only her life but the history of the United States. By this time, Sacagawea was already no stranger to hardship. Having endured the traumatic capture and forced march to the Hidatsa villages, followed by her marriage to Toussaint Charbonneau, a man she likely viewed as an obstacle more than an ally, Sacagawea had learned to navigate adversity. She was a young mother carrying her infant son Jean-Baptiste, and would face the physical, mental, and emotional strain of this grueling journey with a determination that would define her role in the expedition. Though Sacagawea was not formally trained as a guide or interpreter, she possessed an invaluable set of skills, an intimate knowledge of the land and its people, a deep understanding of the natural world, and an ability to navigate through the complex social dynamics of various Native American tribes. These attributes would soon become crucial to the success of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Her fluency in the Shoshone and Hidatsa languages made her an invaluable asset, especially as the expedition encountered various indigenous groups along the way. Sacagawea's inclusion in the expedition was not simply an act of necessity but one of mutual benefit. The expedition required someone who could speak to the Shoshone, a tribe that the explorers hoped to contact in order to secure horses for their journey across the Rocky Mountains. Charbonneau, though competent in some languages, was not as well versed in the languages of the northern tribes, and his presence alone would not have been enough to ensure communication. Sacagawea's knowledge of Shoshone culture, language, and geography made her an ideal candidate for this crucial role, but it was more than her linguistic skills that made Sacagawea a significant member of the expedition. As a woman and a mother, Sacagawea represented a rare form of resilience, the ability to balance the responsibilities of motherhood with the harsh realities of exploration. She would carry her son, Jean-Baptiste, on her back during the journey, and her maternal instincts would guide the expedition through times of difficulty and uncertainty. When the expedition set out, Sacagawea's presence was essential in forging connections with the native tribes they encountered. Her status as a mother was particularly significant, as it conveyed a sense of peace and stability to the indigenous groups they met. The sight of a woman with a child was a powerful symbol that signaled the expedition's intentions were not to conquer or dominate, but to engage in peaceful diplomacy. The journey was filled with challenges, and at times the group was confronted with distrust or hostility from the tribes they encountered. But Sacagawea's quiet strength and calm demeanor played a crucial role in navigating these tensions. During the first stages of the journey, Sacagawea and the expedition faced an array of challenges: difficult terrain, unpredictable weather, and dangerous wildlife. The American wilderness was an unknown frontier, and the Lewis and Clark expedition had no clear map to follow. The group had to rely on Sacagawea's knowledge of the land and the environment to guide them through unfamiliar territory. She was instrumental in helping the team find food, often identifying edible plants and roots, and teaching the men how to make use of the land's resources. Her knowledge of the terrain allowed the expedition to avoid unnecessary detours, and her deep understanding of the weather patterns and natural signs helped them navigate through periods of hardship. One of Sacagawea's most significant contributions occurred when the group encountered the Shoshone tribe, a pivotal moment in the expedition. The Shoshone were crucial to the expedition's success because they controlled the horses necessary to cross the Rocky Mountains. The meeting between the Shoshone and the Lewis and Clark expedition was not without its challenges, as the Shoshone initially viewed the explorers with suspicion. However, Sacagawea's presence was instrumental in breaking down those barriers. When Sacagawea finally reunited with her people, it was an emotional and powerful moment. Her connection to the Shoshone tribe, both through language and shared history, proved to be a bridge between the expedition and the Shoshone people. As she spoke to the tribe's leaders, Sacagawea was able to communicate not just with words, but with the quiet, unspoken understanding that came from shared heritage. Her ability to act as a mediator and interpreter allowed the explorers to secure the horses they desperately needed for the next leg of their journey. Through her actions, Sacagawea became not just a guide and interpreter, but a symbol of the bridge between Native American tribes and European American explorers. Her role was not one of passive involvement, but active participation. Every step of the way, she proved to be an essential part of the expedition. As the journey continued, Sacagawea's contributions became more pronounced. Her ability to communicate with various tribes, her knowledge of the land, and her steady presence helped to ensure the success of the expedition, allowing Lewis and Clark to meet their goals and accomplish their mission. Though Sacagawea was not the leader of the expedition and did not seek fame or recognition, her role was undeniably significant. She helped shape the course of the journey in ways that would only be understood in retrospect. Sacagawea's quiet strength, her resilience in the face of adversity, and her deep connection to the land made her an essential member of the expedition, and her contributions cannot be overstated. As the Lewis and Clark expedition continued its journey westward in 1805, the group faced countless challenges that tested their resolve and survival skills. The terrain they traversed grew increasingly difficult, the weather unpredictable, and the challenges of communication with the native tribes they encountered were never far from their minds. Amidst these struggles, Sacagawea's role as guide and interpreter proved to be indispensable. One of the most crucial aspects of the expedition's success lay in their ability to navigate the varied and often hostile terrain of the American wilderness. The land was as untamed as it was beautiful, vast and varied in its challenges. The group had to cross rivers, scale rocky outcroppings, and navigate dense forests, all while enduring the strain of a long, grueling journey. The landscape itself, stretching out before them, seemed like an endless series of obstacles that tested their endurance. Sacagawea, with her deep knowledge of the land, was instrumental in helping the expedition understand how to survive in this difficult environment. She knew where to find edible plants, how to fish, and how to recognize the signs of wildlife in the area. Her understanding of the natural world was not just academic, it was grounded in lived experience. Growing up in the wilderness of the Shoshone people, she knew what the land offered, and just as importantly what it could take away. Her connection to nature helped the expedition avoid potential disasters, especially when it came to food sources. As the expedition crossed rivers and climbed mountains, Sacagawea's steady presence became a source of calm for the group. Despite her youth and the heavy burden of caring for her infant son, Jean-Baptiste, she demonstrated a quiet strength that was crucial during moments of tension and uncertainty. Her resilience and practical knowledge kept the group moving forward, even as the hardships of the journey mounted. In addition to her knowledge of the land, Sacagawea's understanding of the various native tribes they encountered was of great importance. Early in the journey, the expedition had encountered various tribes, and Sacagawea's skill as an interpreter allowed them to communicate and trade peacefully with many of them. Her ability to translate not only the words but also the cultural nuances of each tribe helped establish trust between the explorers and the indigenous peoples they met. This was especially important in an era when interactions between native tribes and European settlers were often fraught with tension and suspicion. Sacagawea's presence was particularly valuable when the expedition reached the lands of the Teton Sioux. The Sioux were a powerful and influential tribe, and their reputation for being wary of outsiders was well known. As the expedition approached their territory, the tension in the air was palpable. Sacagawea, who was familiar with the intricacies of intertribal diplomacy, played a pivotal role in helping ease the situation. By speaking with the Sioux, she was able to negotiate a peaceful resolution, allowing the expedition to pass through their territory without incident. It was moments like this that highlighted Sacagawea's importance to the expedition. Her knowledge of both the land and the people who inhabited it allowed Lewis and Clark to navigate the complex web of Native American relationships. Without her presence, the expedition might have encountered far more hostility, and the journey could have been significantly delayed or even derailed. As the expedition pushed further into the Western Territories, Sacagawea's role became even more vital. The group was soon to face the most difficult leg of the journey, the crossing of the Rocky Mountains. The mountains stood like an impenetrable barrier between them and their goal of reaching the Pacific Ocean. The terrain was unforgiving, the weather harsh, and the prospects of finding food and water scarce. Yet Sacagawea, ever resilient, helped the expedition move forward, guiding them through the treacherous passes and over high ridges. The crossing of the Rockies was one of the most challenging parts of the journey, and Sacagawea's experience with the land proved to be invaluable. Her familiarity with the terrain, especially with the food sources and landmarks that could help them navigate, allowed the group to make it through one of the most dangerous sections of the journey. She helped identify areas where they could find food, locate fresh water, and avoid dangerous wildlife. Her knowledge of the natural environment allowed the expedition to stay on course, even as the mountains threatened to impede their progress. She had grown up in a world where survival depended on understanding the land and its patterns. The skills she had learned in her youth, growing up in the rugged beauty of the American West, were now being put to use in the most challenging circumstances of the expedition. Beyond the physical challenges of crossing the mountains, Sacagawea's emotional resilience also played a key role in keeping the expedition focused. The journey was long, and the stress of constant travel, uncertainty and hardship weighed heavily on everyone. Sacagawea, despite the weight of her responsibilities as a mother and guide, continued to show quiet determination. Her steady presence, even in moments of great difficulty, served as a reminder to the men that the journey could be completed, that they could make it to the other side. Sacagawea's ability to adapt to the changing environment and to the evolving needs of the expedition made her an invaluable member of the team. She was not simply a passive figure who accompanied the explorers. She was an active participant in the journey, offering crucial guidance and support every step of the way. Whether it was through her knowledge of the land, her linguistic skills, or her diplomatic expertise, Sacagawea's contributions were immeasurable. The challenges they faced in the Rockies were only the beginning of the obstacles the expedition would encounter, but Sacagawea's continued presence would ensure they had the skills, knowledge, and resilience to meet them. Her contributions to the journey were not just practical, they were also symbolic. She represented a bridge between two worlds, the world of the indigenous peoples of the West and the European-American explorers who were attempting to map and claim the land. As the Lewis and Clark expedition ventured into the heart of the Rocky Mountains in the summer of 1805, they were met with some of the most challenging terrain they would face on their journey. The Rocky Mountains, a towering range that spanned the width of the continent, were an imposing obstacle, their jagged peaks and deep valleys creating an almost insurmountable barrier between the explorers and their ultimate goal, the Pacific Ocean. For Sacagawea, the prospect of crossing these mountains was as daunting as it was crucial, but it was a challenge she was uniquely prepared to face. Sacagawea's early years spent in the rugged landscapes of the American West had taught her how to survive in a world where the land itself was often both a source of sustenance and a constant threat. Her knowledge of the environment, her ability to recognize signs of weather changes, and her skill in identifying edible plants and roots would become essential as the expedition made its way across this treacherous landscape. The men of the expedition, many of whom had never encountered such challenging terrain, were in need of her expertise. As the group entered the mountains, the harshness of the landscape became evident. The weather shifted quickly, and the days were often cold and unpredictable. The high altitudes made travel slow and exhausting, and the group was often forced to struggle through deep snowdrifts, unstable terrain, and dense forests. Sacagawea's ability to read the landscape, to find paths through the rough terrain, and to identify sources of food became increasingly valuable. Her knowledge of where to find shelter and how to use the land's resources was an invaluable asset to the expedition, particularly as they began to face more and more severe conditions. The expedition's progress was slow, with the group often forced to pause and regroup when faced with particularly dangerous sections of the trail. Sacagawea, while carrying her infant son Jean-Baptiste on her back, continued to lead by example. Her determination to press on, despite the overwhelming challenges, proved to be a source of inspiration for the men of the expedition. Though the journey was grueling, and the strain on their bodies and minds was evident, Sacagawea's steady presence helped to keep morale up. She was not just a guide or an interpreter, she was a symbol of perseverance. One of the most remarkable aspects of Sacagawea's role in the crossing of the Rockies was her ability to adapt to the needs of the expedition, while also balancing her responsibilities as a mother. She was not only helping the group survive the harsh elements and difficult terrain, but was also caring for her son, Jean-Baptiste. The young child, who was less than a year old, was carried on her back for much of the journey. This task, though physically demanding, did not deter Sacagawea from her larger responsibilities. In fact, her maternal instincts seemed to further fuel her determination to push on. It was as if her commitment to her son, and the desire to ensure his survival in such a harsh environment, gave her the strength to continue through the toughest of times. There were moments during the crossing of the Rockies when the physical toll of the journey became nearly unbearable. The altitude was high, and the cold was biting. The group struggled to find food and often had to ration their supplies, but Sacagawea's knowledge of the land allowed her to forage for plants and roots that could sustain them. ensuring they did not go hungry during some of the most difficult stretches. Her skill in identifying edible plants and wildlife, and a deep understanding of how to survive in such a challenging environment, were critical to the group's survival. Perhaps one of the most memorable aspects of the crossing was Sacagawea's ability to maintain a sense of calm and purpose in the face of overwhelming adversity. She was not a leader in the formal sense, nor did she ever seek recognition for her contributions, but her quiet strength and unyielding resolve became the glue that held the expedition together during this particularly difficult portion of the journey. There were moments when it seemed as though the expedition might falter, when the men, exhausted from days of grueling travel, questioned their ability to continue. But Sacagawea's presence, her steady guidance, and her maternal resilience gave the group a sense of direction. The men saw in her a symbol of endurance, a reminder that the journey could still be completed. As they pressed on day after day through the unforgiving landscape of the Rockies, Sacagawea's contributions became more and more apparent. Her survival skills, her intimate knowledge of the land, and her ability to communicate with the various tribes they encountered were essential to the expedition's success. One particular incident during the crossing of the Rockies stands out as a testament to Sacagawea's role in the expedition. As they neared the Bitterroot Mountains, the group faced their most difficult challenge yet. The terrain was almost impassable, and the weather was turning colder. The men were exhausted, and some began to question whether they could make it through the mountains. But it was Sacagawea who kept them moving forward, leading the group through the harsh conditions and helping them navigate the treacherous passes. Her presence during this time helped to maintain the group's focus and resolve. In the end, Sacagawea's ability to guide the expedition through the Rocky Mountains was a crucial turning point in the journey. Without her knowledge of the land and her unshakable determination, it is likely that the expedition would have been delayed or even turned back. Sacagawea proved that she was not just a passive participant in the journey, but an active and indispensable part of its success. After months of navigating the vast and rugged wilderness, the Lewis and Clark expedition finally emerged from the dense forests and craggy mountain passes of the Rocky Mountains in the fall of 1805. For the men of the expedition, reaching the Pacific Ocean was the culmination of an arduous journey that had tested their endurance, their willpower, and their very survival. For Sacagawea, it was a moment of profound significance, a moment of quiet triumph, not just for herself but for the contribution she had made to this journey. The path to the Pacific had not been easy. They had faced countless obstacles, from harsh weather and difficult terrain to the strain of carrying their supplies and navigating through lands where no European settlers had tread before. The expedition had relied heavily on Sacagawea's knowledge of the land, her ability to communicate with the indigenous peoples they encountered, and her deep understanding of how to survive in the wilderness. When the expedition reached the Pacific, it was not just a geographic achievement. The journey symbolized the success of an undertaking that had been filled with risk and uncertainty. It was the beginning of America's expansion westward, a moment that marked a new chapter in the nation's history. But for Sacagawea, it was a deeply personal moment, one in which her journey from the plains of the Shoshone to this distant shore had reached its natural conclusion. Throughout the journey, Sacagawea's role had been indispensable, though often unacknowledged. She had helped the expedition find food, cross difficult terrain, and maintain peace with the native tribes they encountered. Her presence had made it easier for the explorers to form relationships with the indigenous peoples, and her linguistic skills had allowed for the smooth negotiation of trade and alliances. In the face of hardships, Sacagawea had remained a steady force, guiding the group through challenges with a quiet determination. As they arrived at the shores of the Pacific Ocean, the men of the expedition rejoiced at the completion of their mission. The long journey was over, but Sacagawea's work was not done. As they established a temporary camp and prepared to stay through the winter, Sacagawea continued to support the expedition in small yet vital ways. She helped collect firewood, secured food, and offered advice on how to navigate the terrain around the camp. Her familiarity with the land and its resources was as valuable in the final stages of the journey as it had been in the first. For Sacagawea, reaching the Pacific was the end of a chapter, but not the end of her journey. The expedition's return journey would soon begin, and with it came new challenges and new responsibilities. Throughout this journey, Sacagawea had grown from a young mother with little more than her native wisdom into a vital and respected member of the team. Her quiet strength and deep understanding of the world around her had made her an essential part of the expedition's success, and her legacy would remain an integral part of American history. In the winter of 1805, as the expedition rested at the mouth of the Columbia River, Sacagawea continued to care for her son, Jean-Baptiste, and help the men prepare for the return journey. The Pacific coast was a far cry from the dry, rugged mountains she had crossed earlier, but Sacagawea's ability to adapt to her surroundings had served her well. She was able to find new resources, forge new relationships, and continue to support the mission in ways both large and small. While Sacagawea was not the only guide or interpreter on the expedition, her role was pivotal in the successful navigation of the Pacific Northwest. Her intimate knowledge of the land, her linguistic skills, and her ability to create peaceful relationships with the indigenous groups they encountered made her indispensable. Yet, like many of the women in American history, her contributions would often go unrecognized in the annals of the expedition. Though the men of the journey would leave their mark in history, Sacagawea's legacy was quieter, perhaps more enduring in the long term for its subtlety and steadiness. In the months following their arrival at the Pacific, Sacagawea would continue to support the expedition's efforts to gather information and resources. She contributed to the collection of botanical samples and assisted in gathering information about the area's resources, all while continuing to care for her son. Her resilience and adaptability in this foreign land were not lost on the men, though they may not have fully understood the extent of her contributions at the time. To them, she was an invaluable guide, a trusted ally, and a reliable source of knowledge. Her presence in the expedition helped define the success of their mission. As the expedition prepared to return eastward, the journey would once again test their endurance. Sacagawea, now a veteran of the arduous trail, would continue to play a critical role in the expedition's survival, but it was her contributions to the expedition's success, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, that would ensure her place in the history books. The completion of the mission, her part in that success, and her deep knowledge of the land would be forever tied to the story of the Lewis and Clark expedition, though Sacagawea's personal legacy would remain a quiet one, overshadowed by the fame of the men she accompanied. The impact of her role in the success of the expedition cannot be understated. Without her, the course of the journey might have been delayed or derailed altogether. The Pacific Ocean, which symbolized the success of the mission, also marked a significant moment in Sacagawea's life, a culmination of her contributions and the fulfillment of a journey that had begun long before her encounter with Lewis and Clark. She had become a bridge between cultures, a guide through a hostile landscape, and a symbol of the quiet strength that often shapes the course of history. The completion of the journey to the Pacific Ocean marked a moment of victory for the Lewis and Clark expedition, but it also signalled the beginning of the difficult return journey eastward. After spending the winter of 1805 to 1806 at Fort Clatsop near the mouth of the Columbia River, the expedition was ready to head back to St. Louis. For Sacagawea, the return journey would bring new challenges, as well as a reflection of everything she had already endured on the journey to the Pacific. The emotional and physical toll of the journey was not over, and the stakes were just as high. As the group began their journey back east in the spring of 1806, Sacagawea's role remained as vital as it had been during the westward trip. Her knowledge of the terrain, her linguistic skills, and her ability to negotiate with indigenous groups along the way would continue to guide the explorers through some of the most difficult parts of the journey. With the expedition already fatigued from the long and harsh travels, Sacagawea's resilience remained a steady and comforting force. The return journey posed its own set of difficulties. After the successful crossing of the Rockies, the expedition was once again faced with the challenge of navigating a landscape that had become both familiar and unpredictable. The weather remained a constant factor, with rainstorms and rising rivers making the path back east an arduous and dangerous one. Sacagawea, who'd already demonstrated her ability to navigate through the most challenging terrain, was once again indispensable. Her calmness in the face of hardship helped maintain the morale of the group. One of the greatest obstacles on the return trip was the need to retrace the path they had taken across the Rocky Mountains and re-establish the relationships they had forged with the native tribes along the way. Many of the groups they had encountered were still wary of the explorers, and Sacagawea's ability to mediate and maintain peaceful relations was critical to ensuring the expedition's safe passage. Her fluency in the languages of several tribes and her deep understanding of intertribal relations were assets that the expedition could not afford to overlook. On the return journey, Sacagawea once again played the crucial role of translator and mediator. She was particularly important in interactions with the Shoshone tribe, where the ties she had established during the first leg of the journey were put to the test. Reconnecting with her people was an emotional experience for Sacagawea, though it was marked by a sense of pragmatism. She knew that the mission's success depended on the cooperation of her tribe, and she worked diligently to ensure that the expedition would secure the horses they needed to continue their journey eastward. In many ways, the return journey was a time of reflection for Sacagawea. She had completed what she had set out to do. She had helped guide the Lewis and Clark expedition through unknown territory, bridged cultural divides, and facilitated peaceful relations with native tribes. Now, as the group retraced its steps, Sacagawea found herself navigating a different set of challenges. The men of the expedition were eager to return home, and their exhaustion was evident. Yet Sacagawea, ever the steady presence, was unwavering in her determination to see the journey through to the end. Despite the challenges of the return trip, the expedition's success was undeniable. They had mapped new territories, documented valuable natural resources, and established diplomatic relations with various native tribes. The information they had gathered would be invaluable to future settlers and explorers, and while Sacagawea was not a leader in the formal sense, her contributions to the expedition were essential to its success. She had proven herself as an expert guide, a skilled interpreter, and a reliable and steadfast member of the team. The return journey would also mark the beginning of a new chapter for Sacagawea. Her role in the expedition would eventually lead to her place in history. Though her contributions were not widely acknowledged at the time, after the journey, Sacagawea would return to her life with Toussaint Charbonneau, and the family would settle in the Mandan Hidatsa villages for a time. Sacagawea's future, however, was far from settled. Her legacy would not be fully recognized until years later, when historians began to recount the true story of the Lewis and Clark expedition and the quiet, resilient woman who had played such a pivotal role. Though Sacagawea's story has often been overshadowed by the more prominent figures in American history, her place in the story of the West and the expansion of the United States is undeniable. She'd accomplished something extraordinary, traveling across the continent, helping to map vast new territories and ensuring the survival of an expedition that would change the course of history. Her journey, like the land she traversed, was full of struggle, resilience, and quiet strength. Sacagawea's role in the Lewis and Clark expedition is a reminder that history is often shaped by those who are not at the forefront, by those whose contributions are overlooked in favor of more visible figures. Yet, without Sacagawea's guidance, without her deep understanding of the land and the people who lived on it, the expedition might have faltered. She was more than just an interpreter or a guide. She was a vital force in one of America's greatest historical undertakings. As the expedition made its way home, Sacagawea's quiet resilience and unwavering strength continued to shine through, even as the journey neared its end. Her journey, much like that of the Lewis and Clark expedition itself, had been long, difficult, and filled with challenges. But it was also a journey of triumph, of crossing boundaries both literal and cultural, and of demonstrating the power of persistence in the face of adversity. After the conclusion of the monumental Lewis and Clark expedition, Sacagawea's story did not fade into the background, although it was often overshadowed by the more prominent figures who accompanied the journey. She had accomplished something extraordinary, crossing the entire continent, guiding explorers through unfamiliar terrain, establishing vital diplomatic relations with indigenous tribes, and ensuring the survival of the expedition, all while caring for her infant son Jean-Baptiste. Yet the years following her return to the Mandan Hidatsa villages were far from simple or easy. Upon her return, Sacagawea and her husband, Toussaint Charbonneau, settled in the villages of the Hidatsa, where Charbonneau continued to work as a fur trapper. Life after the expedition was not marked by the fame or recognition that Sacagawea deserved. Instead, she returned to a life that was largely shaped by the choices and circumstances of others, particularly her husband's role in the fur trade. Charbonneau, though a part of the expedition, did not have the same lasting impact as Sacagawea. After returning from the journey, he and Sacagawea lived quietly in the villages for a time, but their relationship was strained. It is often noted that Charbonneau was not the most reliable or responsible partner. He was known for his temper and lack of social grace, which combined with his dependence on the fur trade did little to improve his standing in the community. Sacagawea, by contrast, remained a figure of quiet strength, her character defined by her resilience and adaptability, traits that had sustained her through years of hardship. In the years following the expedition, Sacagawea's life became more settled, but it was not without struggle. She gave birth to a second child, a daughter named Lisette, with Charbonneau. The couple lived in relative obscurity in the Mandan Hidatsa villages, where Sacagawea continued to raise her children. The historical record becomes increasingly sparse as Sacagawea's life unfolded after the expedition, and details about her later years remain unclear. However, some accounts suggest that Sacagawea's health began to deteriorate during this period. Her once strong and resilient body, which had carried her through long treks across the wilderness, began to show signs of wear. Sacagawea's legacy, however, remained undiminished. Though she did not seek recognition during her lifetime, her contributions to the Lewis and Clark expeditions slowly gained acknowledgement as historians began to realize the significance of her role in American history. Her quiet strength, her knowledge of the land, and her ability to navigate cultural and linguistic divides became the subject of reflection and admiration, even if her name was not widely known during her lifetime. In the early 1810s, Sacagawea's life took another turn. In 1812, she died at the young age of 25, likely due to complications related to childbirth or illness. Her death marked the end of a life that had been lived under extraordinary circumstances. Though she was young, Sacagawea had lived through enough hardship to shape a legacy that would endure for generations. Her death, like much of her life, went largely unnoticed by the broader world. There was no grand memorial or acknowledgement of her passing, and it would be years before Sacagawea's contributions to American history were fully understood and appreciated. In the years following her death, Sacagawea became a symbol of the uncelebrated contributions of women and indigenous peoples, her legacy quietly shining through the historical narrative. Sacagawea's role in the Lewis and Clark expedition, and her impact on the history of the United States, would eventually be recognized as central to the success of the mission. Her actions, her steady guidance, her diplomatic efforts, and her intimate knowledge of the land and its peoples ensured the success of one of the most ambitious and difficult explorations in American history. Her role as a bridge between cultures, her ability to communicate with indigenous tribes and with the explorers, was vital in fostering peaceful relationships and securing crucial resources such as horses from the Shoshone. In the years following Sacagawea's death, her memory began to take root in the collective American consciousness. Over time, her contributions were acknowledged in various ways, from memorials to the eventual naming of towns, counties, and landmarks after her. In the early 20th century, Sacagawea's image began to be portrayed in the public imagination, celebrated for her bravery, resilience, and quiet strength. Her place in American history was secured, and she came to be recognized not just as a historical figure, but as a symbol of perseverance, motherhood, and the power of indigenous knowledge. Though Sacagawea's life ended prematurely, her legacy lived on in the stories told about her, in the monuments erected in her honor, and in the broader cultural understanding of the essential contributions of indigenous women in American history. Today, Sacagawea is remembered not only for her role in the Lewis and Clark expedition, but as a woman whose strength and endurance shaped the course of history in ways that are still felt today. Her story serves as a reminder that even in the shadows of larger historical events, there are figures whose contributions are immeasurable. Figures like Sacagawea, whose legacy is marked by resilience and the quiet determination to push through adversity. Sacagawea's life after the expedition may have been marked by personal challenges, but her place in history, her role in shaping the American frontier, and her contributions to the success of the Lewis and Clark expedition remain unchallenged. She continues to inspire, to remind us that quiet strength can have a lasting impact on history, even when the person wielding it remains in the background. Sacagawea's legacy, though not immediately recognized in her time, has endured and grown over the years, becoming an essential part of the history of the American West. The quiet, resilient woman who crossed the continent, guided explorers through unknown and dangerous lands, and bridged cultures between indigenous peoples and European American settlers, has come to be seen as a symbol of endurance, strength, and the uncelebrated contributions of indigenous women in American history. For many years, Sacagawea's role in the Lewis and Clark expedition was overshadowed by the fame of the men who led it. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, along with other figures in the expedition, received much of the recognition, while Sacagawea's contributions were often minimized or overlooked. It wasn't until much later, through the work of historians and cultural advocates, that her importance to the expedition began to be fully appreciated. Sacagawea's role in the expedition was not just that of a guide or interpreter. She was a bridge between two worlds, navigating the complexities of both indigenous cultures and European American exploration. Her knowledge of the land, the tribes, and the natural resources was critical to the success of the journey. Her ability to speak multiple languages, particularly Shoshone and Hidatsa, allowed the expedition to form crucial alliances with native tribes along the way. These relationships were not simply transactional. They were grounded in mutual respect and understanding, in large part due to Sacagawea's unique position. Her presence on the expedition also played an important symbolic role. As young mother, Sacagawea carried her infant son, Jean-Baptiste, throughout the journey, and her very act of motherhood became a symbol of peace. To many of the indigenous groups they encountered, the sight of a woman with a child represented a peaceful intention, distinguishing the expedition from other groups that sought to conquer or control. Her quiet resilience in the face of the immense challenges of the journey also made her a symbol of endurance and perseverance, qualities that were essential to the success of the expedition. Beyond her work with the expedition, Sacagawea's legacy also extends to the broader cultural understanding of indigenous women's roles in history. While many historical narratives have centered on the actions of men, Sacagawea's story has helped to illuminate the often overlooked and undervalued contributions of women, particularly those from indigenous cultures. Her life story serves as a reminder that history is often shaped by those who are not in the spotlight, those whose quiet actions, perseverance, and knowledge had an immeasurable impact on the world around them. In the decades following Sacagawea's death, her memory began to be kept alive through various means. She became a symbol of American exploration and the contributions of native peoples to the founding of the nation. Her name was given to towns, counties, schools, and monuments across the United States. Sacagawea's image appeared on coins and postage stamps, and her name became synonymous with courage and resilience. In the early 20th century, Sacagawea's legacy was further solidified in the public imagination. The 1905 unveiling of the Sacagawea dollar coin marked a significant moment in the recognition of her place in American history. The coin depicted Sacagawea carrying her son on her back as a tribute to her role in the Lewis and Clark expedition. This tribute was not just a recognition of her contributions, but also a recognition of the way she had come to symbolize the strength and determination of indigenous women. In addition to physical monuments, Sacagawea's legacy also lives on in the cultural memory of the United States. She's frequently celebrated in literature, film, and other forms of media as a heroine of the American West. Her story has been told and retold, becoming an important part of the broader narrative of American exploration and expansion. However, Sacagawea's legacy is not without complexity. As with many historical figures, her contributions are often examined through the lens of contemporary values and concerns. The way in which Sacagawea's story has been told, sometimes romanticized, sometimes oversimplified, has led to important discussions about the representation of indigenous peoples in American history. While her accomplishments are undeniable, it is crucial that her legacy is understood in the context of the broader story of native peoples' experiences with European settlers and the long history of colonization and displacement. Sacagawea's life was one of resilience and adaptability, but it was also shaped by the complex dynamics of power, culture, and history. Her story intersects with the experiences of indigenous peoples in ways that are often overlooked. She lived at a time when native nations were being displaced, and their lands were being claimed by the expanding United States. While Sacagawea's contributions to the Lewis and Clark expedition were vital to its success, they must also be understood as part of a larger historical narrative of indigenous resistance, survival, and adaptation. Sacagawea's legacy, then, is not just about the expedition she helped lead, but also about the way her story has been reclaimed and remembered in the broader context of Native American history. She stands as a symbol of the resilience of indigenous peoples in the face of colonialism, and as a reminder that history is shaped not only by the actions of the powerful, but also by the quiet strength of those whose stories have long been silenced. Today, Sacagawea's name is a powerful symbol of both American history and indigenous perseverance. She's remembered as a mother, a guide, an interpreter, and a woman whose contributions were vital to one of the most important journeys in American history. Though her name was often overlooked in her time, it is now celebrated as a testament to the strength, resilience, and quiet power of women, particularly indigenous women, in shaping the course of history. Sacagawea's legacy extends far beyond her role in the Lewis and Clark expedition. Over time, she has become an iconic figure, not only in American history but in the broader narrative of the American West. Her image has been used to symbolize the quiet strength of indigenous women, as well as the resilience of native peoples in the face of colonization. While Sacagawea was often not recognized for her contributions during her lifetime, the passing of time has allowed her to emerge as a powerful symbol of endurance, wisdom, and the intersection of cultures in the early days of the United States. Over the years, Sacagawea's story has evolved into more than just the account of a young mother who helped guide an expedition across the American continent. She has come to represent the challenges faced by indigenous peoples during the early years of the nation's expansion, as well as the perseverance required to navigate a world of displacement and cultural upheaval. Sacagawea's legacy, like that of many indigenous figures, is complex, shaped by the historical and cultural forces that shaped her life, as well as the ways in which her memory has been framed and reinterpreted in the modern era. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Sacagawea was often portrayed in ways that focused primarily on her role as a guide and interpreter for the Lewis and Clark expedition. She was celebrated as an exceptional figure, but her identity as an indigenous woman was often overlooked or minimized in favor of a more romanticized version of her life. This version of Sacagawea, as a noble and selfless helper to the explorers, fit into the broader narrative of American exceptionalism, a narrative that celebrated the expansion of the United States, but often overlooked the complex relationships between settlers and native peoples. As the 20th century progressed, Sacagawea's image began to evolve in more nuanced ways. Scholars, writers, and indigenous activists began to re-examine the historical record, offering a more comprehensive view of Sacagawea's life and legacy. She was no longer simply a passive participant in the Lewis and Clark expedition, but a central figure whose contributions were integral to the success of the journey. Her role as a guide, interpreter, and peacekeeper was recognized as essential to the survival of the expedition, and her presence helped foster diplomatic relations between native tribes and the European-American explorers. Sacagawea's significance also expanded beyond her role in the expedition. She began to be seen as a symbol of the strength of indigenous women and the resilience of native communities. Her life, marked by hardships and survival, came to represent the challenges faced by indigenous peoples during a time of rapid change and cultural disruption. She became an emblem of the perseverance required to endure the displacements, conflicts, and losses brought on by the encroachment of settlers on native lands. In the modern era, Sacagawea has been remembered in many forms, from statues and monuments to books and films. Her image, often depicted with her infant son Jean-Baptiste on her back, has become an enduring symbol of motherhood, strength, and the contributions of indigenous peoples to the history of the United States. Her image was featured on the US dollar coin, and her story continues to inspire generations of Americans, particularly Native women, who see in her a figure of resilience and courage. However, Sacagawea's status as a symbol of American history is not without its complexities. The way her image has been used over the years often reflects the historical tensions between indigenous peoples and settlers. In some cases, Sacagawea has been co-opted into a narrative that minimizes or overlooks the struggles of native communities. While her contributions to the Lewis and Clark expedition were significant, it is important to recognize that her story is also part of a larger history of colonization, displacement, and resistance. Sacagawea's life, like that of many indigenous figures, reflects the complexities of navigating a world in which native peoples were constantly forced to adapt and survive in the face of overwhelming odds. Today, Sacagawea is celebrated in a variety of ways, but her legacy is also part of ongoing conversations about how indigenous peoples are represented in American history. As we continue to examine and reinterpret the past, Sacagawea's image provides a lens through which we can understand the resilience of indigenous communities and the role of native peoples in shaping the course of history. Her story serves as a reminder that history is not just made by those in positions of power, but by those whose contributions are often overlooked or forgotten, and yet whose impact is undeniable. Sacagawea's enduring legacy is a testament to the power of quiet strength. She did not seek fame or recognition, but her contributions were essential to the success of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Her role as a guide, interpreter, and diplomat helped shape the course of American history, and her legacy lives on in the many ways she's been remembered and honored. As we look back on her life and the history she helped shape, we're reminded that the stories of those who are not in the spotlight can be just as significant as those of the famous figures who dominate the history books. Sacagawea's image, both as a historical figure and as a symbol, will continue to inspire future generations. She stands as a reminder of the resilience of indigenous peoples, the strength of women, and the quiet, often unnoticed contributions that have shaped the history of the United States. Sacagawea may not have been a conqueror or a political leader, but her legacy endures as one of the most important figures in the history of American exploration, and in the larger story of the American West. Sacagawea's legacy, as a symbol of indigenous strength and a key figure in American history, has often been defined through the lens of external narratives. The story of her life, one marked by resilience, adaptation, and survival, was initially told by others, mostly non-indigenous men, whose perspectives tended to diminish or simplify her role. However, as time has passed, efforts have been made to reclaim her story, to highlight her agency, and to recognize the fullness of her contributions. The reclaiming of Sacagawea's story has been part of a broader movement to bring indigenous voices and experiences to the forefront of American history. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, the stories of indigenous women in particular were either marginalized or erased. Sacagawea's life was no exception. While her role in the Lewis and Clark expedition was acknowledged in some circles, it was often framed through the lens of her relationship to the male explorers rather than her personal agency, knowledge, and leadership. Over time, historians, scholars, and indigenous activists have worked to shift the narrative, emphasizing Sacagawea's role as an active participant rather than a passive helper. Her knowledge of the land, her linguistic skills, and her ability to facilitate peaceful interactions with various native tribes were critical to the success of the expedition. Yet, for many years, her contributions were largely underplayed. By the mid-20th century, however, there was a growing recognition of her importance, not only to the Lewis and Clark expedition, but to the broader history of native peoples in the United States. The reclamation of Sacagawea's story also coincided with a larger movement toward recognizing the history and culture of indigenous peoples. The civil rights movement and the Native American rights movement of the 1960s and 1970s sparked a re-examination of historical narratives, and Sacagawea's story became a symbol of the need to recognize the contributions of indigenous peoples to the shaping of American history. As part of this shift, Sacagawea was increasingly celebrated not as a passive figure, but as an essential force within the context of exploration and diplomacy. She was no longer merely the Indian guide for the expedition, but was seen as an expert who guided Lewis and Clark through her deep knowledge of the land and the indigenous peoples. One of the key elements of reclaiming Sacagawea's story was addressing the erasure of her native identity. For much of the early 20th century, Sacagawea's story was told primarily from the perspective of Euro-American settlers. While her achievements were acknowledged, her indigenous background was often sidelined or ignored. Reclaiming her story meant not only recognizing her contributions, but also understanding the complexity of her identity as a native woman. Sacagawea was not just a helper to the expedition, she was a mother, a member of the Shoshone tribe, and a vital part of her people's history. Acknowledging this was crucial in providing a fuller picture of her life and the broader implications of her journey. In recent years, Sacagawea has become a symbol of indigenous women's resilience and leadership. Her image has been used in a variety of ways to honor not only her legacy, but also the continued struggles and triumphs of indigenous peoples. Schools, libraries, and institutions have been named in her honor, and her story has been told in countless books, documentaries, and educational programs. As Native communities continue to advocate for greater recognition of their histories and contributions, Sacagawea stands as a powerful reminder of the importance of reclaiming lost or overlooked stories. One significant part of reclaiming Sacagawea's story has been the emphasis on her role as a mother. Throughout the Lewis and Clark expedition, Sacagawea carried her infant son, Jean-Baptiste, on her back, a detail often highlighted as symbolic of her strength and maternal love. However, her role as a mother was also instrumental to the success of the expedition. Sacagawea's maternal presence represented peace and stability to the indigenous tribes the explorers encountered. As they crossed treacherous terrain, Sacagawea continued to care for her child while providing invaluable guidance to the expedition. In this sense, her motherhood was not just a personal role but an essential part of the diplomatic function she served. The image of Sacagawea carrying her son has become one of the most enduring symbols of her legacy. It reflects the ways in which Sacagawea's identity was multifaceted. She was a guide, a diplomat, a mother, and an indigenous woman navigating a complex and often hostile world. By reclaiming this image, we acknowledge the depth of Sacagawea's contributions, not only to the Lewis and Clark expedition, but to the broader narrative of American history. Moreover, the reclamation of Sacagawea's story also involves confronting the historical injustice of her time. As a Native woman, Sacagawea lived in a period of profound upheaval, as the United States expanded westward, displacing Native peoples from their land and culture. The contributions of indigenous peoples to the expansion of the United States are often overlooked in traditional historical narratives, but Sacagawea's story highlights the ways in which indigenous peoples, particularly women, played key roles in these early encounters. Reclaiming her story helps to correct the historical record, allowing for a more inclusive understanding of American history. Sacagawea's legacy, as it is understood today, is not just about one woman's contributions, but also about the broader recognition of indigenous peoples' role in shaping the history of the United States. It is a reminder that history is not made solely by the powerful, but by all those who quietly shape the course of events. Sacagawea's story is one of survival, adaptability, and quiet strength, and her reclamation serves as a vital part of understanding the complexities of American history. The process of reclaiming Sacagawea's story continues as new generations of indigenous activists and historians work to ensure that her legacy is fully recognized. In this process, Sacagawea has become not just a historical figure, but a symbol of the strength of Native women, the resilience of indigenous peoples, and the ongoing struggle for recognition and respect. Through the reclamation of her story, Sacagawea's legacy endures as an integral part of American history, shaping the way we understand the past and the present. Sacagawea's influence extends beyond the annals of American exploration and history. Her cultural impact continues to be felt in the stories, symbols, and narratives that shape the identity of the American West. Her name has become synonymous with resilience, adaptability, and the quiet strength required to navigate both a physically and emotionally challenging world. The recognition of Sacagawea's contributions to the Lewis and Clark expedition has led to a broader cultural understanding of Native women's roles in shaping the course of history. Sacagawea's legacy is rooted not just in the historical record but in the cultural memory of the United States. Her image, often depicted with her son Jean-Baptiste on her back, serves as a reminder of the intersection of motherhood and survival. Her story speaks to the experiences of indigenous peoples, and particularly indigenous women, who faced extraordinary challenges as their lands and cultures were altered by the encroachment of European settlers and the expanding United States. As a result, Sacagawea has become a symbol of the strength and resilience of indigenous women throughout American history. In the early 20th century, Sacagawea's cultural impact began to be recognized through public monuments and memorials. Her name became associated with schools, towns, counties, and parks, and her image was memorialized on US coins and currency. The most famous of these memorials is the Sacagawea dollar, issued by the US. Mint in 2000, which features an image of Sacagawea carrying her infant son, the coin became a cultural icon, representing not only Sacagawea's contribution to the Lewis and Clark expedition, but also her place in the broader narrative of American history. The use of Sacagawea's image on the dollar coin, however, was not without its controversy. Some felt that the representation of Sacagawea, particularly as a native woman, was part of a long-standing history of the appropriation of indigenous identities for symbolic purposes. The use of her image in a way that celebrated the American expansion at the expense of indigenous cultures highlighted the ongoing tension between the recognition of native contributions and the erasure of their struggles. Still, the coin became a symbol of the need to honor native history and the essential role of indigenous peoples in shaping the United States. Sacagawea's story has also been passed down through literature and film, further solidifying her place in the cultural fabric of the nation. She's been portrayed in novels, documentaries, and fictionalized accounts of the Lewis and Clark expedition. These portrayals range from highly accurate historical accounts to more dramatized retellings of her life. While these representations have varied in their fidelity to the historical record, they have played a significant role in shaping the way Sacagawea is remembered. Her legacy as a quiet, powerful figure has been celebrated in popular culture, as well as in scholarly works that examine her role in American history. In more recent years, Sacagawea's story has been reclaimed and retold from an indigenous perspective, adding depth to the understanding of her legacy. Native authors, historians, and cultural advocates have worked to bring a more nuanced view of Sacagawea's life to the forefront, focusing not only on her contributions to the expedition, but also on her identity as a native woman. These efforts have highlighted the importance of understanding Sacagawea's role in the context of native resistance and survival, rather than simply as an intermediary between indigenous and settler cultures. Sacagawea's image has also been embraced by indigenous communities, where she's seen not only as a historical figure but as a symbol of cultural resilience. Among native peoples, Sacagawea is often celebrated as a role model, particularly for indigenous women who continue to navigate the challenges of living in a world shaped by colonialism and displacement. Her story has been an inspiration for activists, educators, and community leaders who work to preserve indigenous languages, cultures, and traditions in the face of ongoing struggles for self-determination. In native communities, Sacagawea's legacy has been used to raise awareness about the importance of women's voices in indigenous communities. Her role as a mother, guide, and cultural bridge highlights the often overlooked leadership roles that indigenous women have played throughout history. Sacagawea's story serves as a reminder that women, particularly indigenous women, have been integral to the survival and flourishing of native communities, even when their contributions have been erased from mainstream historical narratives. Her impact also extends into the modern struggle for native sovereignty and recognition. As indigenous peoples continue to fight for their rights, including the protection of land, culture, and language, Sacagawea's legacy serves as a powerful reminder of the enduring strength of native communities. Her image is invoked in protests, public demonstrations, and cultural celebrations, reminding both native and non-native peoples of the essential role that indigenous people play in the fabric of American history. Sacagawea's cultural impact is not confined to the borders of the United States. Her story has been embraced by native peoples across North America, and her legacy has transcended national boundaries. She has become a figure of cultural pride, a symbol of the survival of native peoples in the face of colonialism and the resilience of indigenous women throughout the centuries. Her name and image have also made their way into international discussions about indigenous rights and representation. In the global context, Sacagawea's life story is seen as a testament to the universal struggle for cultural preservation and the recognition of indigenous peoples' contributions to the world. Her legacy has helped to spark conversations about the importance of decolonizing historical narratives and ensuring that the voices of indigenous peoples are heard and honored. While Sacagawea's cultural impact is undeniable, it is important to remember that her legacy is also tied to the ongoing struggles of native peoples. Her life was shaped by the complexities of colonization, cultural upheaval, and resistance. Sacagawea's story, in its fullness, reflects both the immense contributions of indigenous peoples and the painful history of displacement, survival, and adaptation. Sacagawea's story continues to inspire and to challenge, urging us to rethink our understanding of history and the role of indigenous peoples in shaping the world. As we honor her legacy, we're reminded that history is not only made by those in power, but by those whose stories are often overlooked, those whose quiet strength has shaped the world in ways that we're only now beginning to understand. Sacagawea's journey through the American West occurred during a time of tremendous change, not only for indigenous peoples, but also for the United States as a nation. The early 19th century was marked by westward expansion, and the Lewis and Clark expedition itself was a reflection of the country's ambitions to explore and claim new territories. Sacagawea's role in this expansion, however, is more nuanced than simply assisting American explorers in conquering the unknown. Her story is inseparable from the larger context of American colonialism and the dispossession of indigenous peoples from their lands. During Sacagawea's lifetime, the United States was driven by the notion of manifest destiny, the belief that the nation was destined to expand across the continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This belief was rooted in the idea that Americans had a divine right to claim and settle the lands of the West, regardless of the indigenous peoples who had lived there for centuries. As American settlers moved westward, native communities faced increasing pressure, not only from military forces but from the cultural and economic changes brought by settlers. Sacagawea, like many indigenous peoples, found herself living in the midst of these profound changes. While her early life was shaped by the traditions and rhythms of the Shoshone people, by the time she was captured and later became part of the Lewis and Clark expedition, she was already caught in the larger currents of westward expansion. As a woman, a mother, and a native person, Sacagawea navigated these changes with resilience, finding ways to serve both her people and the explorers in ways that ensured her survival. Her journey with Lewis and Clark, while contributing to the successful mapping of the West, also represented a deeper story of survival for indigenous peoples. Sacagawea's knowledge of the land and its natural resources was not only beneficial to the expedition, it was also an expression of the profound relationship that indigenous peoples had with the land, a relationship that the American settlers and explorers could not fully comprehend. Her intimate connection to the land helped bridge two very different worlds, the indigenous world and the settler world. In many ways, Sacagawea's role can be viewed as a symbol of how indigenous peoples were called upon to assist in the development of the United States, even as their own cultures and lands were threatened. The impact of Sacagawea's story also extends to the symbolic role that indigenous women played during this period. Women like Sacagawea were central to the survival of their communities, serving as carriers of tradition and knowledge. They helped maintain the social fabric of their cultures, preserving languages, customs, and practices that were essential to their people's way of life. Yet, as settler colonialism expanded, these very roles were often undermined or overlooked. Sacagawea's legacy, however, stands as a reminder of the crucial role that Native women played, not just in the survival of their communities, but in shaping the history of the United States. As Sacagawea traveled across the continent with Lewis and Clark, she encountered new peoples, and through her interactions with the various tribes, her story became a reflection of the broader shifts taking place. The United States was rapidly expanding westward, and the diverse nations of native peoples who had long inhabited the land were forced into new, often violent relationships with settlers and explorers. Sacagawea's diplomatic abilities, the way she helped navigate these encounters, illustrate the critical importance of negotiation and communication during this period. Her survival depended on her ability to engage in a complex system of alliances and negotiations, one that required careful balancing of her own cultural identity and the demands of the American explorers. Despite her pivotal role in the success of the expedition, Sacagawea's story was largely lost in the official narrative of American expansion. The U.S. government's depiction of the westward expansion tended to focus on the triumphs of settlers and explorers, often ignoring the rich and complex histories of indigenous peoples. For Sacagawea, this meant that her contribution was recognized only in relation to the Lewis and Clark expedition, not as part of a broader story of indigenous survival and resistance. The legacy of westward expansion is fraught with the history of colonization, the displacement of native peoples from their lands, the destruction of cultures, and the forced assimilation that followed. Sacagawea's own story was shaped by these very forces. As a member of the Shoshone, she faced the consequences of colonization from a very young age, beginning with her capture and forced relocation. Her role in the Lewis and Clark expedition, then, must be understood not only in the context of American expansion, but also in the context of the survival strategies that indigenous peoples had to adopt in order to protect their culture and way of life. Sacagawea's knowledge of the land, her ability to negotiate with different tribes, and her deep understanding of natural resources were essential in guiding the explorers. But they were also reflective of a relationship to the land that had existed for thousands of years before the United States came into being. For Sacagawea and many other indigenous peoples, the land was not something to be conquered, but something to be respected and preserved. Her actions on the expedition demonstrated her ability to adapt and survive in a changing world, but they also demonstrated the resilience of indigenous cultures in the face of colonization. As the United States expanded westward, the indigenous populations faced new pressures and challenges. Sacagawea's life in many ways represents the tensions of this period. She navigated the demands of settlers and explorers while maintaining her own sense of identity as a native woman. Her legacy highlights the difficult choices that indigenous peoples had to make in order to survive in an increasingly colonized world. Sacagawea's story, while one of survival, is also a story of the strength and endurance of indigenous peoples, who were called upon to shape the future of the United States while simultaneously resisting the forces that sought to erase their cultures. Sacagawea's role in the Lewis and Clark expedition is now seen as a pivotal moment in American history. Her contributions to the exploration of the American West are essential to understanding the broader story of westward expansion. However, her story is also a reminder of the ongoing struggles of indigenous peoples, the fight for cultural preservation, and the resistance against the forces of colonization. Sacagawea's story is not only a pivotal chapter in the broader narrative of the American West, but it also holds significant meaning within the context of Native American histories. Her life and legacy reflect the deep, complex relationships between indigenous peoples and the American settlers who arrived with the expanding United States. Sacagawea's role in the Lewis and Clark expedition is often viewed through the lens of her contribution to American exploration, but it is crucial to remember that her actions were part of a larger, ongoing resistance to colonization and the encroachment on native lands. The history of Native Americans, particularly during the early 19th century, is one of survival, adaptation, and resistance. Native tribes across the United States were being displaced, their ways of life were being threatened, and their cultures were under attack. For Sacagawea, as a member of the Shoshone tribe, this period of upheaval was a defining aspect of her life. Her capture by the Hidatsa, the forced relocation that followed, and her eventual involvement in the Lewis and Clark expedition were all shaped by the larger context of colonialism and the expansionist policies of the United States. While Sacagawea's role in the expedition has often been framed as one of assistance to the explorers, it is equally important to understand her actions within the context of her own people's experiences. The Shoshone, like many other native nations, were navigating a rapidly changing world, one in which their traditional ways of life were increasingly under siege by settlers, traders, and the US government. Sacagawea's decision to work with Lewis and Clark, though it may seem to be a pragmatic choice for survival, also reflects the difficult decisions faced by many indigenous people at the time. For many, cooperation with settlers and explorers was a way to secure resources, protect their communities, and ensure the survival of their culture, even if it meant engaging with forces that ultimately sought to erase those very cultures. Sacagawea's participation in the Lewis and Clark expedition also highlights the active role that indigenous peoples played in shaping the course of American history, even in the face of overwhelming challenges. While much of the historical narrative has centered on the actions of European settlers and explorers, the contributions of native peoples have often been overlooked. Sacagawea, in her role as a guide and interpreter, was a vital part of the expedition's success, but she was also part of a larger history of indigenous resistance, diplomacy, and survival. Her actions can be viewed not just as those of an individual, but as a reflection of the broader struggle of indigenous peoples to adapt, survive, and maintain their autonomy in a rapidly changing world. The relationship between Sacagawea and the Lewis and Clark expedition was not one of domination or conquest, but rather one of negotiation, cooperation, and survival. As a woman and a member of an indigenous community, Sacagawea navigated the complex social dynamics of both the native tribes and the European American explorers. Her ability to bridge these two worlds, one of indigenous knowledge and traditions and the other of European American exploration and expansion, was key to the success of the journey. It was Sacagawea's cultural fluency, her understanding of the land, and her deep knowledge of the indigenous tribes they encountered that ensured the expedition's survival and success. Her role in the expedition was not merely as a passive participant, but as an active force that shaped the course of the journey and the relationships between the explorers and native peoples. Sacagawea's role in the expedition also serves as a reminder of the diverse and complex experiences of native women during this period of American history. While much of the historical narrative has focused on male figures, indigenous women like Sacagawea were often at the forefront of cultural preservation, survival, and diplomacy. In many ways, Sacagawea embodies the resilience of native women, whose contributions have often been overlooked or undervalued in mainstream historical accounts. She represents the vital role that women played in maintaining and passing down cultural knowledge, as well as the ways in which they shaped the course of history through their quiet strength and perseverance. Her legacy, particularly within the context of Native American histories, is one of endurance and adaptability. Sacagawea's story is not just one of survival in the wilderness, but also one of survival in a world that was increasingly hostile to native peoples. Her actions during the Lewis and Clark expedition reflect the broader survival strategies employed by many indigenous peoples during this period, strategies that included cooperation, negotiation, and cultural preservation in the face of colonialism. In the years following the expedition, Sacagawea's story began to be re-examined within the context of indigenous resistance and survival. Scholars and activists began to look at her life not just as a footnote in the history of American exploration, but as a critical part of the larger narrative of native peoples' efforts to navigate a rapidly changing world. Sacagawea's legacy has since been reclaimed by indigenous communities, who view her not only as a historical figure but as a symbol of the strength, resilience, and agency of native women. Sacagawea's role in Native American history also speaks to the broader themes of cultural resilience and resistance. Throughout American history, indigenous peoples have been forced to adapt to a world that sought to erase their cultures, languages, and ways of life. But despite the overwhelming forces of colonization and displacement, indigenous peoples have remained resilient. Sacagawea's story, as part of this broader narrative, serves as a powerful reminder of the ongoing struggle for cultural survival, for the preservation of traditions, and for the rights of indigenous peoples to control their own stories. Her legacy, while often associated with the success of the Lewis and Clark expedition, is also a reminder of the broader history of native resistance, diplomacy, and survival. Sacagawea's actions on the expedition were just one part of the larger story of indigenous peoples' efforts to navigate the complexities of a rapidly changing world. Her story, along with the stories of many other indigenous women, serves as a reminder of the quiet, steadfast strength that shaped the course of American history. Sacagawea's story continues to resonate today, long after her death in 1812. In the 21st century, her legacy is not just a part of the historical record, but an enduring symbol of strength, resilience, and the pivotal role that indigenous peoples, especially women, played in shaping the American story. As society grapples with issues of representation, decolonization, and the reclamation of indigenous histories, Sacagawea's legacy serves as a touchstone for discussions surrounding native rights, identity, and cultural preservation. In modern times, Sacagawea is widely recognized as an icon. Statues in her honor stand in places like Washington, D.C. and North Dakota, celebrating her contributions to American history. Her image has been immortalized on the U.S. dollar coin, which was introduced in 2000. The Sacagawea coin features a portrait of her carrying her infant son, John Baptiste, a powerful symbol of motherhood, resilience, and the uncelebrated roles that indigenous women have played throughout history. However, while these tributes to Sacagawea are valuable symbols, they also prompt important questions about representation. Sacagawea's image, though celebrated, has often been used as a tool to reinforce narratives of American expansionism, which at times gloss over the violent and painful histories of colonization, displacement, and the erasure of native cultures. Her legacy, though important, is not without its complexities. She represents both the resilience of indigenous peoples and the painful history of their oppression. Today, the process of understanding her legacy requires a nuanced examination of the ways her image and story have been used, and at times misused, to serve particular historical narratives. In contemporary discussions, Sacagawea is not merely a symbol of the past, but a focal point for contemporary issues affecting native peoples. For many native communities, Sacagawea embodies the quiet, persistent strength of indigenous women who have been instrumental in keeping cultures alive, navigating between colonial and traditional worlds, and protecting the next generations. Her story is a testament to the resilience of indigenous people, particularly women, who continue to play pivotal roles in preserving languages, traditions, and ways of life amidst the ongoing challenges of colonialism and cultural erosion. Sacagawea's legacy is also part of broader efforts to reclaim indigenous narratives and push back against stereotypes. Over time, native communities have worked to ensure that indigenous peoples are represented authentically and powerfully, without the distortion and romanticization often seen in mainstream media. Sacagawea's history, when viewed through the lens of contemporary native perspectives, offers a more comprehensive understanding of her significance. She was not merely a helper to the Lewis and Clark expedition, but a guide, a mother, a diplomat, and a survivor whose actions were deeply connected to the survival and strength of her people. Additionally, Sacagawea's story resonates with movements for indigenous rights, such as those that advocate for land reclamation, sovereignty, and the protection of sacred sites. Her connection to the land and her profound understanding of its resources was integral to the success of the expedition, and it serves as a reminder of the intimate, sacred relationship that indigenous peoples have with the land. In modern contexts, this bond to the land is at the heart of native activism, where indigenous peoples continue to assert their rights to land, resources and cultural practices that have been threatened by settler colonial policies for centuries. The ongoing reclamation of Sacagawea's story also contributes to a larger movement of revitalizing indigenous languages and histories. Sacagawea, as a multilingual woman, spoke several indigenous languages, including Shoshone and Hidatsa, as well as some French. Her ability to communicate across linguistic and cultural boundaries was critical to her role in the Lewis and Clark expedition. Today, language revitalization efforts in native communities aim to preserve the languages spoken by peoples like the Shoshone, whose traditional ways of communication were once suppressed. Sacagawea's linguistic skills symbolize the importance of language as both a cultural tool and a means of survival. Her image as a mother carrying her infant son through the journey has become a powerful symbol of indigenous motherhood and womanhood. Indigenous women, like Sacagawea, continue to bear the weight of cultural transmission and community survival, often taking on the role of educators, leaders, and keepers of tradition. For many native communities, the strength and resilience of indigenous women are central to cultural preservation. Sacagawea's legacy as a mother is particularly poignant in this regard, symbolizing the nurturing aspect of indigenous culture, as well as the quiet yet profound leadership that women continue to offer. In addition to her symbolic significance, Sacagawea's story has also inspired a body of literature and artistic work. Native authors, artists, and filmmakers have taken up her legacy, exploring her role in history through various forms of expression. These works often offer new perspectives on her life, showing how Sacagawea navigated the complex intersection of cultural survival, colonialism, and gender. Sacagawea's representation in the arts and media serves as a powerful tool for storytelling, as it helps to challenge the historical silences and omissions that have characterized the narratives of native peoples. While Sacagawea's story has been increasingly recognized in mainstream American culture, it is important to understand that the real impact of her legacy is felt most deeply within native communities. For native people, Sacagawea's story is not just about one individual, it is about the collective strength, wisdom, and resilience of generations of indigenous women who have navigated the challenges of colonialism and continue to lead their communities today. Her story, reclaimed and reinterpreted, is a celebration of indigenous knowledge, survival, and resistance, a reminder that native peoples have always played a vital role in the shaping of the United States, and that their contributions continue to be essential. Sacagawea's legacy, when viewed through the lens of modern indigenous rights movements and cultural reclamation, becomes a powerful symbol of the ongoing struggle for justice, recognition, and respect for native peoples. Her story speaks to the resilience of indigenous communities, the importance of language and culture, and the enduring strength of indigenous women, whose contributions continue to shape the future of their peoples. As Sacagawea's legacy continues to evolve in the modern world, her impact on Native American identity has become more profound than ever. Over the centuries, the story of Sacagawea has transcended the historical record, becoming a beacon for indigenous peoples and a point of reflection for those engaged in reclaiming their history, culture, and language. The significance of Sacagawea's role in the Lewis and Clark expedition, particularly as a mother, guide, and cultural intermediary, resonates deeply within the context of contemporary indigenous identity. For native peoples today, Sacagawea represents more than just a historical figure. She embodies the persistence of indigenous resilience and the ability to survive, adapt, and thrive amidst centuries of colonization. The connection to the past that Sacagawea offers provides modern native communities with a source of inspiration, reminding them of the strength their ancestors had and the cultural wisdom they carried, wisdom that continues to be passed down through generations. As native nations struggle to assert their sovereignty and reclaim their cultural practices, Sacagawea's story serves as both a touchstone and a symbol of the ongoing fight for cultural survival. Sacagawea's identity as a Shoshone woman, navigating two worlds during a time of significant upheaval, offers a contemporary parallel for many native people today who similarly navigate the intersection of native heritage and the pressures of modern society. The duality that Sacagawea embodied, balancing the needs of her own people with the demands of the explorers, resonates with modern native identity, which continues to balance the preservation of traditional cultures with the challenges posed by the dominant culture. Her survival story and the ways in which she negotiated these complexities speaks to the resilience of indigenous peoples who must constantly adapt while maintaining a strong connection to their heritage. Furthermore, Sacagawea's identity as a mother carries particular weight in the context of Indigenous women's role in community and cultural continuity. Indigenous women have always been the backbone of their communities, ensuring that traditions, languages, and cultural knowledge are passed down to future generations. Sacagawea's role as a mother on the expedition, caring for her son while simultaneously guiding the explorers, reinforces the importance of motherhood and family in native societies. Her example has become a powerful model for Indigenous women today, who continue to play a central role in their communities, often balancing multiple responsibilities while maintaining cultural ties. In modern native communities, Sacagawea's story is used to teach younger generations about the importance of resilience, cultural pride, and the uncelebrated power of Indigenous women. While her contributions to American history were often overlooked in her time, today her life and legacy are used as tools for empowerment. Indigenous women are reclaiming their leadership roles in their communities, advocating for their rights, and preserving their cultural traditions. Sacagawea's legacy, with its themes of survival and diplomacy, provides a foundation for contemporary native women's activism and cultural revitalization. In this light, Sacagawea's identity is also becoming a platform for decolonizing the way native people are represented in the broader American narrative. Her story, like many native stories, has been distorted or minimized by external narratives, often focusing on her relationship with the explorers rather than the rich depth of her own life. By reclaiming Sacagawea's story, native people are challenging these reductive portrayals and pushing for a more nuanced understanding of native histories, identities, and contributions. This process of decolonization involves understanding Sacagawea not just as a figure in American history, but as a person with her own agency, struggles, and cultural heritage that are integral to understanding the history of the American West. The reclamation of Sacagawea's legacy is also part of a larger movement to preserve and promote native languages. Sacagawea's fluency in multiple languages, including Shoshone and Hidatsa, underscores the importance of language as a tool for cultural survival. Language is a living connection to identity, history, and tradition. The loss of indigenous languages due to historical forces of colonization and forced assimilation has had a devastating impact on native communities. However, today, there is growing effort to revitalize native languages, ensuring that they remain a vital part of native culture. In this context, Sacagawea serves as a model of linguistic versatility, bridging cultural gaps and fostering communication, an example that resonates deeply with modern efforts to revitalize and preserve native languages. Sacagawea's legacy also highlights the critical role that native women played and continue to play in shaping the future of their communities. Indigenous women have long been the bearers of culture, tradition, and knowledge, and they continue to be at the forefront of efforts to protect land, water, and the environment. Today, many Native women are leaders in their communities, running for office, advocating for the environment, and fighting for the recognition of Indigenous rights. Sacagawea's role as a guide, a mother, and a leader in the context of the Lewis and Clark expedition provides a powerful image for the Indigenous women who carry on this work today. While Sacagawea's legacy is often celebrated in the context of her role in American exploration, her true significance lies in how her life continues to inspire contemporary Indigenous identity. Her story exemplifies the values of strength, adaptability, and perseverance, qualities that are crucial for navigating the complexities of the modern world. For Native peoples today, Sacagawea's legacy represents the ongoing struggle for cultural preservation, the protection of native lands, and the empowerment of Indigenous communities, especially Indigenous women. As the story of Sacagawea continues to evolve, it serves as both a reflection of the past and a beacon for the future. Her journey reminds Native peoples of their deep cultural roots, their capacity for survival, and their ability to shape their own futures, despite the challenges they continue to face. The reclaiming of Sacagawea's legacy is an integral part of the broader process of Indigenous revitalization, ensuring that her story is told on Native terms and that her contributions to history are finally recognized and celebrated. As the centuries have passed, Sacagawea's image has endured, evolving into an emblem of strength, resilience, and Indigenous contributions to American history. Her journey, while marked by immense challenges, has come to symbolize much more than the Lewis and Clark expedition. It embodies the survival of Indigenous peoples and the ongoing fight for cultural preservation and self-determination. In many ways, Sacagawea's story is a continuous thread through the fabric of Native American history, reminding both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples of the deep, often overlooked, role that Native communities have played in shaping the United States. While Sacagawea's place in American history has become more widely recognized over time, it's crucial to understand her significance in the broader context of Indigenous history, which has often been left out of the narrative of American expansion and progress. As the United States expanded westward, Indigenous peoples were often erased or diminished in the telling of that history. Yet Sacagawea, as a figure who bridged the gap between Native communities and the European American explorers, offers a powerful image of the ways in which Native peoples not only survived, but also navigated the changing dynamics of colonialism, survival and resistance. Today, Sacagawea stands as one of the most recognized and enduring symbols of Indigenous resilience. Her image, often depicted with her infant son Jean-Baptiste on her back, speaks to the broader role of Indigenous women in their communities, women who, much like Sacagawea, have carried the weight of cultural survival, family and leadership. Her legacy is part of a long tradition of Indigenous women who have maintained their cultures, languages and ways of life despite centuries of colonization and displacement. The representation of Sacagawea in contemporary times is not just about remembering her role in the Lewis and Clark expedition, but about understanding her as part of a broader historical narrative of Indigenous survival and agency. Sacagawea is more than an historical figure, she is a cultural symbol. In this light, her story becomes a call for the recognition and celebration of Indigenous peoples, particularly Indigenous women, whose voices and contributions have often been silenced. In recent decades, Sacagawea has been central to movements for decolonization and native empowerment. Her life, when viewed through the lens of modern Indigenous activism, reflects the struggles of native communities to preserve their lands, languages, and identities in the face of ongoing colonization. Her resilience is a reminder of the strength and determination of Indigenous peoples, whose histories and cultures are too often overlooked or misrepresented in mainstream narratives. One of the most significant aspects of Sacagawea's enduring symbol is the way she represents the strength of Indigenous mothers. As a mother herself, Sacagawea carried her son across the continent, facing unimaginable physical and emotional challenges while still providing for him. Her journey as a mother resonates with modern Indigenous women who continue to bear the responsibility of cultural transmission, whether through language revitalization, education, or activism. Sacagawea's ability to balance the physical demands of motherhood with the heavy burden of survival and cultural preservation speaks to the broader role of Indigenous mothers as the backbone of their communities. In popular culture, Sacagawea has been portrayed in a variety of ways, as a silent and selfless guide, a noble representative of Native women, and a quiet heroine of American exploration. However, the image of Sacagawea in popular culture is often incomplete, focusing on her role in helping the explorers without fully acknowledging her own identity as a Native woman. The work of contemporary Indigenous scholars and activists has been crucial in shifting the narrative surrounding Sacagawea, ensuring that her story is told on her terms, not simply as a helper to American exploration, but as a vital, autonomous figure who shaped the success of the expedition through her own knowledge, strength, and resilience. Her place in American iconography has also raised important questions about how Native peoples are represented in national narratives. While Sacagawea's contributions have been increasingly acknowledged, her story is still entangled with the larger colonial story of the United States. Her role in the Lewis and Clark expedition, although critical, is situated within a broader context of settler colonialism, a history of displacement, violence, and cultural destruction that continues to affect Native communities today. Understanding Sacagawea's legacy requires not only celebrating her survival and resilience, but also recognizing the historical forces that shaped her life and the lives of countless other Indigenous peoples. Sacagawea's legacy has grown beyond the historical and symbolic. It has become a call to action for the recognition of Indigenous contributions and the ongoing struggles of Native communities. In this sense, she is not just a figure of the past, but a living, breathing symbol of the future. Her legacy continues to inspire contemporary movements for Indigenous rights, environmental justice, and cultural preservation. Just as Sacagawea navigated two worlds, modern Native peoples continue to navigate the complexities of cultural survival in a world shaped by both native and settler societies. Her image has been used in various ways, from memorials and statues to educational materials, all aiming to ensure that her story is remembered and understood. These tributes reflect the growing recognition of the role Indigenous peoples have played in the formation of the United States and the ongoing contributions they make to society. Sacagawea's image has also been an essential part of the larger movement to decolonize history and bring Indigenous voices to the forefront of historical discourse. For Native communities today, Sacagawea is both a historical figure and a modern-day symbol. Her legacy challenges us to think critically about how we understand history and who gets to tell those stories. She serves as a reminder that Indigenous peoples are not relics of the past, but are vibrant, living communities with rich histories and cultures that continue to shape the present. Sacagawea's life, her journey, her struggles, and her survival is a testament to the resilience of Indigenous peoples, and her legacy will continue to inspire for generations to come. In the modern era, Sacagawea has become an integral figure in the broader movement for the revival and recognition of Native American culture. For Native communities across the United States, her legacy has come to represent the intersection of historical survival and cultural resistance, highlighting the ways in which Native peoples have resisted cultural erasure and maintained their traditions in the face of colonization and displacement. Sacagawea's story is not just one of survival, but one of cultural continuity, demonstrating how Indigenous knowledge, strength, and wisdom have persisted despite centuries of oppression. Sacagawea's role in the Lewis and Clark expedition has often been celebrated as an example of the contributions that indigenous peoples made to the early United States. However, her legacy, when placed in the context of Native American cultural revival, takes on a deeper significance. Her ability to navigate between native and settler societies, to provide crucial knowledge of the land, and to facilitate diplomatic relations between native tribes and explorers, speaks to the broader resilience of indigenous cultures. Today, her story serves as a point of reference for contemporary native activists, educators, and cultural leaders working to revitalize native traditions, languages, and identities. Sacagawea's life exemplifies the ways in which indigenous women have been central to the survival and continuity of their cultures. While her story is often framed within the context of the Lewis and Clark expedition, it is important to recognize the ways in which native women, like Sacagawea, have played vital roles in the transmission of cultural knowledge, the maintenance of community, and the protection of their families. Indigenous women were and continue to be the primary bearer of culture, tasked with preserving language, art, and tradition, while also navigating the challenges imposed by colonialism. The contemporary Native American cultural revival is rooted in the reclamation of identities that were systematically stripped away through the process of settler colonialism. As native peoples continue to fight for sovereignty, land rights, and cultural preservation, Sacagawea's story becomes a rallying point, a reminder that indigenous cultures are not relics of the past, but vibrant, evolving systems of knowledge that continue to shape native communities today. Her contributions to the Lewis and Clark expedition, particularly her knowledge of the land, the environment, and native languages, highlight the enduring relevance of indigenous knowledge systems and the importance of preserving them for future generations. The revival of Native American languages is one area where Sacagawea's legacy is particularly important. She spoke multiple languages, including Shoshone and Hidatsa, and played a key role in facilitating communication between the expedition and various indigenous tribes. Today, language revitalization efforts are a critical part of the cultural resurgence happening across native communities. Many native languages are endangered, with some having only a few fluent speakers left. By highlighting Sacagawea's fluency and the importance of language in cross-cultural exchanges, her story underscores the role that language plays in preserving cultural identity. In contemporary Native American communities, Sacagawea is seen as a figure who embodies the strength of indigenous women and the essential role they have played in cultural preservation and revitalization. Indigenous women today are leading efforts to revitalize traditional practices, heal their communities, and strengthen cultural ties. Sacagawea's legacy is a reminder that indigenous women have always been the backbone of their communities, ensuring that culture, language, and tradition are passed down despite the challenges of colonization. Her story inspires modern indigenous women to continue this vital work, advocating for the preservation of their heritage and the empowerment of future generations. Sacagawea's image, often depicted as a mother carrying her infant son, also represents the importance of family and community in indigenous cultures. Indigenous people have long understood the interconnectedness of all life, and the role of motherhood within this understanding is deeply rooted in tradition. Today, as Native women continue to embrace their roles as mothers and cultural transmitters, Sacagawea's legacy offers a symbol of the strength, wisdom, and responsibility that comes with the nurturing of the next generation. Her role as a mother in the context of the expedition highlights the profound connection between motherhood and cultural continuity, reminding us that the survival of a people is often tied to the survival of their children and the passing down of traditions. In addition to her symbolic role, Sacagawea's story also offers a framework for understanding how indigenous peoples navigated their relationships with settlers, explorers, and outsiders. Her position as both a member of her tribe and a participant in the Lewis and Clark expedition reflects the complex negotiations that indigenous peoples had to make in order to survive in a changing world. While many indigenous groups resisted the encroachment of settlers, Sacagawea's story illustrates the pragmatism that some indigenous peoples employed, cooperating with explorers to ensure their survival while also protecting their cultural and territorial rights. This negotiation of identity, power, and survival is a central theme in Native American history and continues to resonate in contemporary discussions around land rights, sovereignty, and cultural preservation. Today, Sacagawea is also a figure of remembrance in discussions about environmental stewardship. Her deep knowledge of the land, its resources, and its ecosystems is reflected in the ways Native communities continue to view the environment. Indigenous peoples have long been stewards of the land, and Sacagawea's understanding of the natural world demonstrates the profound connection between Native cultures and the earth. In contemporary environmental movements, Native voices are at the forefront of advocating for the protection of the land and its resources, fighting against environmental degradation, and calling for the preservation of sacred sites. Sacagawea's legacy reminds us of the centrality of the environment to Native cultures, and the vital role that indigenous knowledge plays in fostering sustainable relationships with the earth. Sacagawea's place in modern Native identity is not only about her historical contributions, but also about the ongoing struggle to reclaim Native autonomy, culture, and agency. Her story serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of cultural survival and revitalization in the face of centuries of colonization. As Native peoples continue to assert their rights and challenge historical injustices, Sacagawea remains a symbol of resilience, adaptability, and the unyielding strength of indigenous communities. Sacagawea's legacy stands as a testament to the enduring leadership of indigenous women who've played pivotal roles throughout history in preserving culture, guiding their communities, and maintaining sovereignty. While Sacagawea's story is often viewed through the lens of her role in the Lewis and Clark expedition, it is also essential to place her within the broader context of Native women's leadership, which has often been undervalued in mainstream historical narratives. Indigenous women, like Sacagawea, have long been central to the survival and flourishing of their peoples. They have traditionally held leadership roles, not only as caregivers and nurturers, but as key figures in the governance, cultural transmission, and social cohesion of their communities. Sacagawea's life and actions exemplify the ways in which indigenous women have navigated complex social, political, and cultural landscapes, balancing their responsibilities within their families and communities with broader roles in diplomacy, governance, and survival. Historically, many indigenous cultures have recognized the leadership of women in various spheres of life. In several Native American nations, women played significant roles in decision-making processes, held positions of influence, and were respected for their contributions to their communities. The Haudenosaunee, Iroquois Confederacy, for instance, has long been known for its matrilineal structure, where clan mothers held significant political power and were responsible for selecting leaders. Similarly, many other indigenous groups valued the wisdom, strength, and leadership of women in their governance structures. Sacagawea's role in the Lewis and Clark expedition, though often framed as that of a passive helper, actually represents the resilience and adaptability that indigenous women have exhibited in response to colonization and displacement. As a guide and interpreter, Sacagawea used her knowledge of the land, her language skills, and her diplomatic understanding of Native cultures to navigate the expedition through hostile or unfamiliar territories. Despite the vast challenges she faced as a young mother, Sacagawea demonstrated strength, leadership, and resilience. Her contributions to the expedition went far beyond mere assistance. She was an active participant in the success of the journey, guiding the explorers through some of the most challenging and unknown terrains. In understanding Sacagawea's leadership, it is important to recognize the cultural and political context of her time. Her participation in the expedition was not an isolated event, but part of a broader set of strategies employed by many indigenous peoples to adapt to the changing world around them. For many indigenous nations, survival during this period meant engaging with the expanding settler society in ways that could help protect their communities and cultures. Sacagawea's engagement with the Lewis and Clark expedition was a form of negotiation, not one of surrender, but one of strategic alliance-making, ensuring that her community's interests and survival were considered. In the context of Native women's leadership, Sacagawea's ability to move between worlds, the native world she belonged to and the settler world represented by Lewis and Clark, serves as a powerful reminder of the diplomatic skills and wisdom that indigenous women have long carried. Sacagawea's understanding of the land, its resources, and its people gave her an invaluable role as a cultural mediator. She was able to guide the expedition safely through terrain that was foreign to the explorers, relying on traditional ecological knowledge passed down through generations. She communicated with various indigenous tribes, ensuring that the explorers could navigate their territory without unnecessary conflict. Sacagawea's leadership, however, extends beyond her role in the expedition. She was a mother and a caretaker, balancing the demands of her role as a nurturer with the necessity of contributing to her people's survival. Today, this dual role of indigenous women as both leaders and caretakers is reflected in the work of Native women in their communities, where they continue to uphold cultural traditions, strengthen their families, and lead efforts to protect their land and heritage. Sacagawea's example serves as a model for contemporary Native women, many of whom are leading social, political, and cultural revitalization efforts across the country. In modern Native communities, Indigenous women are at the forefront of activism and leadership, from the front lines of environmental protests, such as those at Standing Rock, to the ongoing work of preserving Native languages and traditions. Native women are asserting their leadership in ways that continue to echo Sacagawea's legacy. Many Native women are also working to address social and economic challenges in their communities, advocating for their people's rights, health, and well-being. They are navigating a complex political landscape while holding on to the values and teachings of their ancestors. Sacagawea's legacy also serves as a reminder that Indigenous women have always played vital roles in the governance and diplomacy of their nations, even if their contributions have been overlooked or undervalued in mainstream histories. Her participation in the Lewis and Clark expedition was just one example of how Indigenous women have influenced the course of history. The work that Sacagawea did as a cultural intermediary is still relevant today, as Indigenous women continue to bridge the gap between their communities and the outside world, negotiating for their people's rights and sovereignty. In many ways, Sacagawea's life and contributions embody the continued resilience of Native American women. Her leadership, rooted in her deep knowledge of the land and the people, speaks to the broader role that Indigenous women continue to play in cultural preservation, political engagement, and community leadership. She is not just a historical figure but a living symbol of the enduring power of Native women, whose contributions have shaped the past and continue to shape the future of Native communities. Sacagawea's leadership offers a powerful example of how Indigenous women have and continue to shape the cultural and political landscape of their nations. By reclaiming her story, Native communities can ensure that the contributions of women in shaping their histories, cultures, and futures are recognized and honored. Her legacy, as both a mother and a leader, continues to inspire Native women today, empowering them to embrace their roles as leaders and protectors of their culture. Despite the historical significance of Sacagawea's role in the Lewis and Clark expedition, much of her personal life remains shrouded in mystery. While her contributions to the success of the journey are well documented, the details of her early life, her thoughts, and the exact circumstances of her death are still subjects of historical debate. This uncertainty surrounding Sacagawea's life only adds to her mystique, as she remains an enigmatic figure whose full story has yet to be revealed. Yet the mystery of Sacagawea's life, far from diminishing her legacy, deepens the intrigue and admiration with which she's regarded today. Sacagawea was born around 1788. Though the exact year is unknown, she was part of the Shoshone tribe, and her early years were spent in the Rocky Mountains, where her people hunted and gathered along the rivers. By the time she was a teenager, Sacagawea's life was dramatically altered when she was captured by the Hidatsa tribe, along with others from her Shoshone band. This event, which led to her relocation to the Hidatsa Mandan villages near present-day North Dakota, marked the beginning of a long and tumultuous journey. However, the details of her capture, including how it occurred or how long she was held by the Hidatsa before being traded to the French-Canadian fur trapper Toussaint Charbonneau, remain unclear. What we do know is that at some point Sacagawea married Charbonneau and became part of his household, which was a relatively low-status position in the Hidatsa villages. Charbonneau, while a skilled fur trapper, was known for his opportunistic nature, and his relationship with Sacagawea was likely one of survival rather than love. During this time, Sacagawea gave birth to her son Jean-Baptiste, who would accompany her on the expedition. Sacagawea's role in the Lewis and Clark expedition, beginning in 1804, brought her into the broader narrative of American exploration. While Charbonneau was hired by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark as an interpreter for the expedition, it was Sacagawea's linguistic skills, knowledge of the land, and connections to other indigenous tribes that proved indispensable to the success of the journey. She was essential in navigating the unknown terrain, and her presence provided the expedition with the necessary means to communicate with various native groups along the way. However, while Sacagawea's contribution to the expedition is well recognized, very little is known about her personal thoughts or experiences during the journey. We do not know what Sacagawea thought about the explorers or how she felt about being part of such an ambitious and dangerous mission. There is no surviving documentation or record of Sacagawea's direct words or thoughts during the expedition, making it difficult to understand her motivations beyond her role as a guide, interpreter, and mother. Historians and researchers have long speculated about her personal feelings, but these remain unknown, adding an air of mystery to her legacy. After the expedition, Sacagawea's life becomes even more uncertain. Following the completion of the journey, Sacagawea returned to the Mandan Hidatsa villages, where she lived with Charbonneau for some time. There is little recorded about her life after the expedition, and it is unclear whether she remained with Charbonneau or whether the two separated. Sacagawea's second child, a daughter named Lisette, was born during this period, but she passed away shortly after birth, further adding to the tragedy and obscurity of Sacagawea's later years. Sacagawea's death, too, remains shrouded in mystery. She is believed to have died in 1812, likely from an illness or complications following childbirth, but the exact cause of her death has never been confirmed. Accounts of her death vary, with some stating that she died at a young age in her 20s, while others suggest that she lived longer. There is no definitive record of her passing, which has fueled ongoing speculation about the circumstances of her death and the final years of her life. The mystery of Sacagawea's death has only heightened her allure as a historical figure, leaving much of her personal story untold. In light of these mysteries, Sacagawea's legacy is often framed not just by the known aspects of her life, but by the gaps in the historical record. The lack of first-hand accounts, personal reflections, or detailed biographical information makes her a somewhat elusive figure in American history. Yet, despite these uncertainties, Sacagawea's role in the Lewis and Clark expedition and her significance as an indigenous woman who bridged two very different worlds remain undeniable. The mystery surrounding Sacagawea's life also speaks to the larger history of native peoples in America. Much of Native history, particularly that of Indigenous women, has been obscured or overlooked by mainstream historical narratives. The absence of detailed records about Sacagawea's personal life is part of a broader pattern in which the voices and stories of Native peoples, especially women, were not fully recorded or valued. In this sense, Sacagawea's enigmatic legacy reflects the erasure and silencing of Indigenous peoples' stories by colonial powers, and her enduring mystery invites us to question the gaps in history and reconsider the ways we engage with the stories of marginalized communities. In the modern context, the mystery of Sacagawea's life can also be seen as a call for greater recognition of Indigenous women's roles in history. The lack of documentation about Sacagawea's personal experiences highlights the broader issue of the marginalization of Native women's voices in historical records. Today, as Native peoples work to reclaim their history and ensure their stories are heard, Sacagawea stands as both a symbol of resilience and a reminder of the importance of preserving Indigenous voices and experiences for future generations. Despite the mysteries that surround Sacagawea's life, her legacy is clear. She remains a central figure in the story of the American West, not only as a guide and intermediary, but as a symbol of Indigenous strength, survival, and leadership. The questions that remain about her life only add to the richness of her story, inviting further exploration and understanding of the complexities of her existence in a time of great cultural upheaval. Sacagawea's story is in many ways a reflection of the untold histories of Indigenous peoples, histories that continue to be uncovered and celebrated today. Sacagawea's legacy, while rooted in the history of the Lewis and Clark expedition, has grown far beyond that single chapter of her life. As the centuries have passed, Sacagawea has transcended her role as a guide and interpreter, becoming a larger symbol of Native American strength, resilience, and survival. Her legacy, shaped by the historical circumstances of her life, has found new meaning in modern times as Native communities continue to reclaim their narratives and assert their cultural rights. Today, Sacagawea's image has been reinterpreted, reimagined, and reclaimed in ways that highlight her role as an enduring symbol of Native women's leadership and cultural preservation. Sacagawea's role in the Lewis and Clark expedition, while central to her legacy, has often overshadowed the complexities of her personal life and identity. However, as more Indigenous scholars, writers, and activists have worked to reclaim Native stories, Sacagawea's legacy has evolved into something more multifaceted. Rather than being viewed merely as a helper to the explorers, Sacagawea is now seen as an active, autonomous figure who navigated the challenges of colonialism, displacement, and survival with grace and wisdom. Her story, while still tied to the history of American exploration, is increasingly understood as a part of the broader history of Indigenous resilience in the face of colonial oppression. In modern times, Sacagawea's story has become a key part of the conversation about the need for Indigenous representation and recognition. As Native communities continue to fight for cultural survival, language revitalization, and political sovereignty, Sacagawea has become a symbol of the endurance of Native peoples. Her story is not just about the past, but about the present and future of Native communities. It serves as a reminder of the deep connection between Indigenous peoples and the land, the strength of Indigenous women, and the continued relevance of Indigenous knowledge in addressing contemporary challenges. The revival of Sacagawea's story in the American imagination has also been intertwined with efforts to recognize the contributions of Indigenous women in particular. For many years, Native women's roles in history were marginalized or ignored. Sacagawea's image has become central to the movement to ensure that Indigenous women are acknowledged as cultural leaders, warriors, and activists. Her status as a mother, guide, and diplomat has made her a powerful figure for contemporary Native women, who continue to navigate the intersection of traditional roles and modern challenges. Sacagawea's legacy is one of survival, but also one of leadership and cultural empowerment, qualities that are being carried forward by Indigenous women today. In recent decades, Sacagawea's image has been used in a variety of ways to celebrate her legacy, from public monuments and school curricula to works of art, literature, and film. Her representation in popular culture has evolved, with increasingly nuanced portrayals that emphasize her strength, independence, and cultural knowledge. Sacagawea is no longer solely a historical footnote or a symbol of peace for explorers, but a figure of active resistance and resilience. Her story is often retold through the voices of Indigenous authors and filmmakers who highlight her role as a woman who navigated the complexities of colonialism and played a vital role in her community's survival. This reclamation of Sacagawea's legacy is part of a broader movement to decolonize the historical narrative of the United States. By examining Sacagawea's life and contributions, historians and activists are challenging the ways in which American history has often minimized or erased the experiences of Indigenous peoples. In particular, Sacagawea's story is being used to critique the traditional narratives of American expansion, offering a more nuanced understanding of the relationships between Indigenous peoples and settlers. This new interpretation of Sacagawea's legacy helps to challenge the myth of the vanishing Indian and reaffirms the ongoing presence and strength of native peoples in the modern world. In addition to this cultural renaissance, Sacagawea's rebirth in the American imagination has sparked broader conversations about the contributions of Indigenous peoples to the United States and the world. Her involvement in the Lewis and Clark expedition was not just a singular event, but part of a larger pattern of Indigenous people shaping the course of history. Sacagawea's legacy is a reflection of the broader role that Native peoples have played in the exploration, survival, and development of the American West. Her story, though often overshadowed by the more famous figures of Lewis and Clark, is now being recognized as central to the history of the United States, providing a richer, more inclusive narrative that honors the complexities of Native life and history. Furthermore, Sacagawea's role in bridging two worlds, the Indigenous world and the settler world, continues to be relevant today. In an age of global interconnectedness, Sacagawea's life serves as a reminder of the power of diplomacy, cultural exchange, and cross-cultural understanding. Her ability to speak multiple languages, understand diverse customs, and navigate the delicate relationships between different groups serves as a model for how societies can communicate, cooperate, and coexist in a world that is often divided by cultural and political differences. Sacagawea's legacy in this sense is not just about the past, but about how we approach the challenges of the present and future. Sacagawea's rebirth in the American imagination also marks a shift in how we understand Native American identity. No longer defined solely by victimhood or tragedy, Native identity is being reclaimed as one of strength, leadership, and cultural vibrancy. Sacagawea's legacy is central to this reclamation, as she embodies the resilience and wisdom of Native peoples, particularly Native women, who have long been the backbone of their communities. Her story is one of endurance, adaptability, and wisdom, qualities that continue to define Native peoples as they navigate the complexities of the modern world. Sacagawea's image, as a mother, a guide, and a survivor, offers an enduring symbol of the strength of Indigenous women. Her story is a powerful reminder that despite the overwhelming forces of colonization, Native peoples and their cultures have not only survived but have thrived. The revival of Sacagawea's legacy serves as a testament to the power of Native peoples to reclaim their stories and ensure that their voices are heard, both in history and in the present day. Sacagawea's legacy continues to inspire a wide range of artistic expressions, and her image has become a central figure in the ongoing reclamation of Indigenous culture. In the world of art, Sacagawea stands as a symbol of strength, resilience, and the quiet yet powerful contributions of Indigenous women. Her life, though historically bound by complex and difficult circumstances, has provided a foundation for contemporary Indigenous artists and cultural creators to explore themes of survival, identity, and the navigation of two worlds. Indigenous art, in its many forms, has long been a means of cultural preservation, storytelling, and political expression. From traditional beadwork and pottery to contemporary painting, sculpture, and multimedia art, Native artists have used their work to both reflect and challenge the dominant narratives of American history. Sacagawea's life and legacy have inspired artists who draw upon her image to address issues of cultural survival, land rights, and the vital role that Indigenous women play in their communities. In many ways, Sacagawea's image as a mother, guide, and diplomat has served as a symbol for contemporary Native artists who seek to represent the multifaceted nature of Indigenous womanhood. Indigenous women like Sacagawea have historically balanced the roles of cultural bearer, caretaker, and leader within their communities. This balance, which Sacagawea navigated while also participating in one of the most important expeditions in American history, has become an important focal point for artists who wish to explore the strength and resilience of Indigenous women. Throughout history, artists have used Sacagawea's image to highlight the power of Indigenous mothers, whose responsibility extends beyond the nurturing of children to the preservation of culture, language, and community. Her story, as one of survival and protection of her son while guiding an entire expedition, resonates deeply with contemporary issues faced by Indigenous women. Many Indigenous artists today create works that honor Sacagawea as a figure who encapsulates these struggles: the fight for survival, the role of women in leading their communities, and the ongoing resilience of Indigenous peoples in the face of overwhelming adversity. Furthermore, Sacagawea's participation in the Lewis and Clark expedition offers a compelling opportunity for artists to reflect on the intersection of Indigenous culture and settler colonialism. Her ability to bridge the gap between two worlds, that of the explorers and her own Indigenous identity, serves as a powerful metaphor for the complexity of Native experiences under colonial rule. Artists often depict Sacagawea in ways that show her strength and agency, challenging the romanticized portrayals of the past and emphasizing her autonomy as a cultural mediator. In these representations, Sacagawea becomes a symbol of resistance, reminding viewers that Indigenous peoples have always played an active role in shaping history, even when their voices have been marginalized or silenced. Sacagawea's legacy also intersects with broader themes in Native art regarding the restoration of traditional cultural practices and the reclamation of land. As artists explore their relationships with the land, nature, and their ancestors, Sacagawea stands as a reminder of the profound connection between Native peoples and their territories. Her intimate knowledge of the land, the plants, and the animals on the expedition routes speaks to a deep and enduring cultural relationship that continues to be central to Native identity. Many Indigenous artists today explore these themes by using their work to express a connection to the land, highlighting the importance of environmental stewardship and the protection of sacred spaces. In addition to the representation of Sacagawea in visual art, her image has also been explored in literature, music, and performance. Native writers, particularly women, have drawn upon her story to challenge historical narratives and tell stories of Indigenous resistance, survival, and cultural pride. Sacagawea's life is explored in novels, poems, and essays as writers reimagine her experience through their own cultural lenses. These literary works provide new interpretations of Sacagawea's legacy, expanding her influence beyond traditional historical accounts and allowing her story to continue evolving as it intersects with contemporary struggles. Music and performance art have also provided powerful mediums for telling Sacagawea's story. Native musicians and performers use their craft to tell stories of survival, strength, and resistance. often invoking Sacagawea's legacy as part of a larger narrative of indigenous resilience. In performances that blend traditional and contemporary forms, Sacagawea's image is used to call attention to the cultural continuity of native peoples, who, like Sacagawea, continue to assert their presence and their identities in a world shaped by colonialism. Her influence in indigenous art and culture is also seen in the movement toward repatriating indigenous objects, artifacts, and cultural practices that were once appropriated or taken during the era of westward expansion. Sacagawea's role as a cultural intermediary between native tribes and European settlers provides a lens through which to view the ongoing struggle to return sacred items, repatriate ancestral remains, and restore cultural practices that were lost or suppressed. Just as Sacagawea helped navigate the complex dynamics between the native world and the settlers, indigenous peoples today are navigating similar complexities as they work to reclaim their heritage and preserve it for future generations. The resurgence of native art and culture today reflects a collective desire to honor the wisdom of elders, embrace cultural traditions, and pass down stories like Sacagawea's to future generations. Contemporary native artists continue to push boundaries by blending traditional and modern artistic expressions, ensuring that the lessons of the past and the strength of women like Sacagawea remain relevant. Her legacy, as both a historical figure and a cultural symbol, continues to inspire artists who seek to explore native identity, reclaim history, and express the ongoing strength of indigenous peoples. In a world where indigenous cultures are still fighting for recognition and respect, Sacagawea's story has become a source of pride and a powerful symbol of native survival. As native communities continue to reclaim their voices, Sacagawea's image will continue to inspire not only artists, but all those who are engaged in the fight for indigenous rights, cultural preservation, and the reclamation of land and identity. Her legacy, like the art she inspires, remains a living testament to the strength and resilience of native peoples. As we reach the final chapters of Sacagawea's story, it becomes clear that her legacy remains as relevant today as it was more than 2 centuries ago. Sacagawea's life, filled with challenges, triumphs, and moments of resilience, has inspired countless generations. From the explorers she aided to modern indigenous peoples who see in her story a powerful symbol of survival, strength, and cultural endurance. Sacagawea is no longer just a figure of historical interest. She's a touchstone for contemporary struggles involving identity, land rights, and the reclamation of native cultures. In recent decades, as indigenous peoples across North America continue to assert their rights and work to preserve their languages, traditions, and sovereignty, Sacagawea's legacy has been reinterpreted and reclaimed by native communities. Far from being confined to the pages of history books, Sacagawea's image has become a central symbol in movements for environmental justice, cultural revitalization, and the empowerment of indigenous women. Her story, which once stood as a quiet footnote in the history of the Lewis and Clark expedition, now serves as a rallying point for those who seek to challenge the historical narratives that have long marginalized indigenous peoples and their contributions to the world. At the heart of Sacagawea's continuing relevance is the recognition that she represents the strength and resilience of native women, whose voices have historically been overlooked or ignored. In Sacagawea, we see not only an indigenous woman who guided explorers across an unknown continent, but also a mother who navigated the personal, emotional, and social complexities of her time. Her image as a mother, particularly with her infant son Jean-Baptiste on her back, has come to symbolize the intersection of motherhood, leadership, and cultural survival. For contemporary indigenous women, Sacagawea embodies the quiet but powerful role they continue to play in their families, communities, and nations. In recent years, there has been a renewed effort to celebrate Indigenous women as the backbone of their communities, who often carry the responsibility of preserving culture, language, and traditional knowledge. The strength of Native women, exemplified by figures like Sacagawea, continues to be a source of pride and inspiration. Indigenous women today are leading efforts in areas such as education, environmental activism, healthcare, and governance, reclaiming roles that have long been held by their ancestors. Sacagawea's legacy is integral to this resurgence of leadership, as she exemplified the ability to navigate complex cultural terrains while holding steadfast to her identity and responsibilities. Sacagawea's legacy also remains crucial in discussions about environmental stewardship and land rights. Her deep knowledge of the land, its resources, and the natural world was vital to the survival of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Today, as Indigenous communities continue to fight for the protection of their sacred lands and natural resources, Sacagawea's understanding of the land serves as a reminder of the intimate relationship that Indigenous peoples have with the earth. Environmental issues such as the preservation of water sources, forests, and sacred sites remain critical to Native communities, and Sacagawea's legacy underscores the importance of respecting and protecting the land that sustains all life. Her story also intersects with the ongoing movement for Native sovereignty and the return of stolen lands. The reclamation of sacred spaces, the assertion of rights to ancestral territories, and the protection of the environment are all ongoing struggles for Native peoples. Sacagawea's role as an intermediary between Indigenous nations and foreign explorers mirrors the diplomatic efforts of many Native communities today, who continue to navigate complex political systems to assert their rights and preserve their way of life. As Sacagawea's legacy continues to evolve, her story has become a symbol of the broader fight for justice, equality, and recognition of Indigenous peoples. Her place in American history is increasingly being viewed not just through the lens of exploration, but through the lens of resistance. She represents a long line of Indigenous leaders, diplomats, and advocates who have fought for their people's rights, lands, and culture. Her legacy has been reclaimed by Native artists, writers, and activists who use her image to inspire a new generation of Indigenous youth to take pride in their heritage and to understand the power they possess to shape their own futures. For all the attention that Sacagawea's life has garnered, it is important to recognize that her story is not a solitary one. Her life was shaped by the struggles and triumphs of the Shoshone people, and it is in this broader context that her legacy truly comes to life. She was one of many Native individuals who helped bridge the gap between cultures, navigate complex relationships, and ensure the survival of her people. Sacagawea's story is part of a much larger narrative of Indigenous survival, resistance, and resurgence. Sacagawea's influence is seen in the ways that Native peoples today are rewriting their own stories, reclaiming their history, and asserting their sovereignty. The fight for Native rights is not just a political struggle, it is also a cultural one. As Native communities continue to fight for their rights to land, language, and self-determination, Sacagawea's legacy serves as both a symbol of the past and a source of inspiration for the future. Her journey reminds us that survival is not just about enduring hardship, but about resisting oppression, asserting one's identity, and working toward a future that honors both the past and the present. In this way, Sacagawea's legacy is as much about the future as it is about the past. As we continue to celebrate her contributions, we are reminded of the importance of preserving Indigenous knowledge, of honoring the strength of Indigenous women, and of ensuring that the voices of Native peoples are heard in the ongoing struggle for justice and equality. Sacagawea's journey is not over. It continues to inspire, challenge, and inform the work that is being done today to protect and empower Native communities. As we reach the final segment of Sacagawea's journey, it is clear that her legacy transcends the boundaries of time, place and culture. While her life was marked by profound challenges, from her early capture to a pivotal role in the Lewis and Clark expedition and her untimely death at a young age, her influence endures today, continuing to inspire and inform both indigenous communities and the broader American public. Sacagawea's legacy is not confined to the pages of history, but is woven into the fabric of contemporary struggles for indigenous rights, cultural preservation, and the empowerment of native peoples. Sacagawea's contribution to the Lewis and Clark expedition is undeniably significant. Without her guidance, linguistic skills, and deep knowledge of the land, the expedition's success would have been far from assured. Yet her impact was far greater than just a single historical event. Sacagawea stands as a symbol of resilient strength and the enduring connection between indigenous peoples and the land they have stewarded for millennia. Her legacy has become a cornerstone in the ongoing fight to preserve native cultures, assert native sovereignty, and protect sacred lands from exploitation and destruction. Throughout her life, Sacagawea navigated the complex realities of both indigenous and settler worlds. She faced unimaginable hardships, from her capture and forced relocation to the demands of life as a guide and mother on one of the most important expeditions in American history. Despite these challenges, Sacagawea remained steadfast, guiding the expedition with grace and intelligence, always focused on ensuring the survival of her people. Her story represents the quiet strength and resilience of countless indigenous women, whose contributions have often been overlooked, but are no less crucial to the survival of their cultures. In the modern context, Sacagawea's legacy is increasingly recognized as part of the larger movement for decolonization and the reclaiming of indigenous narratives. For centuries, native voices have been silenced or erased in the telling of American history. The story of Sacagawea, like the stories of many other indigenous peoples, has been shaped by the lens of settler colonialism. Yet through the reclamation of her story by indigenous communities, Sacagawea has become a symbol of the ongoing fight for justice, self-determination, and cultural resurgence. Sacagawea's legacy is also inextricably tied to the role of indigenous women in shaping their communities and protecting their cultural heritage. Throughout history, indigenous women have been the bearers of knowledge, wisdom, and cultural practices. They have been the stewards of language, the teachers of the next generation, and the keepers of tradition. Sacagawea's life and work embody this legacy. Her strength as a mother, guide, and cultural mediator serves as a powerful reminder of the critical role indigenous women continue to play in both the survival and revitalization of their communities. Her legacy has also sparked a renewed interest in indigenous environmental stewardship. Sacagawea's profound understanding of the land, its resources, and its ecosystems speaks to the deep, interconnected relationship that indigenous peoples have with the earth. Today, as native communities continue to fight for the protection of their sacred lands, waters, and resources, Sacagawea's life serves as a model for the work being done to ensure that future generations inherit a planet that is cared for, protected, and respected. Her connection to the land is a reminder that the survival of indigenous cultures is inextricably linked to the survival of the environment. In addition to her environmental significance, Sacagawea's story has become an important tool in the fight for indigenous rights and recognition. As native peoples continue to assert their sovereignty and challenge the historical injustices that have been imposed upon them, Sacagawea's life offers a vision of how to navigate between worlds, maintain one's cultural integrity, and engage with settler society in ways that ensure survival without losing identity. Her role as a guide, mediator, and translator serves as a model for how indigenous peoples can assert their voices, protect their sovereignty, and create lasting change. While Sacagawea's story has been celebrated in various ways over the years, from monuments to coins and even films, It is important to remember that her legacy is not simply about how she is remembered, but about how we engage with the deeper meanings of her life. Sacagawea's story calls us to rethink the ways we view history, the contributions of indigenous peoples, and the ongoing struggles for justice, equality, and self-determination. Her legacy is about more than one woman's journey. It's about the resilience and strength of an entire people whose voices and contributions continue to shape the world today. Sacagawea's legacy, like her life, continues to evolve. As more indigenous voices are heard and more native stories are told, Sacagawea's image will remain a symbol of the strength, wisdom, and survival of indigenous peoples. Her story will continue to inspire future generations of Native women, leaders, and activists who are carrying forward the work she began, advocating for their communities, protecting their lands, and ensuring that their cultures and traditions thrive for generations to come. In closing, Sacagawea's place in history is secure, not just as a figure of the past, but as a symbol for the future. Her legacy serves as a reminder that history is not just about what has happened, but about what continues to unfold. The lessons she taught about survival, resilience, strength, and the importance of cultural preservation are as relevant today as they were when she first set foot on the trail with Lewis and Clark. Sacagawea's story is one that will continue to inspire, challenge, and guide all who seek to understand the importance of the past in shaping the future. As we reach the conclusion of Sacagawea's story, we are left with a powerful reminder of the strength, resilience, and profound influence of indigenous peoples in shaping the course of history. Sacagawea's life was filled with challenges, but she faced them with quiet determination, courage, and wisdom. From her early years as a young Shoshone woman, to her pivotal role in the Lewis and Clark expedition, to her lasting legacy as a symbol of indigenous survival and cultural preservation, Sacagawea's journey is one that continues to resonate today. Her contributions to the expedition, though often understated, were invaluable, guiding the explorers through unfamiliar territories, bridging the gap between indigenous nations and the settlers, and ensuring the survival of the mission. Yet Sacagawea's legacy is not confined to that single chapter in history. Her story reflects the broader resilience of native peoples, particularly indigenous women, whose strength and leadership have often been overlooked, but have always been integral to the survival and vitality of their communities. In modern times, Sacagawea's legacy has been reclaimed and reinterpreted, not just as a historical figure, but as a symbol of empowerment for native peoples. Her image as a mother, a guide, and a cultural mediator has become a symbol of the quiet yet powerful leadership of indigenous women. Today, Sacagawea is celebrated for her role in shaping history, but also for her representation of the ongoing struggles for justice, self-determination, and cultural revitalization faced by indigenous communities around the world. Sacagawea's story also serves as a reminder of the importance of reclaiming indigenous voices in the telling of history. Her image, once used to reinforce colonial narratives, has been reshaped to reflect the complexities of her life and the broader history of indigenous peoples. Through the reclamation of her story, Sacagawea has become a touchstone for a new generation of native activists, leaders, and artists who are using their voices and their art to challenge historical erasure and assert their presence in contemporary society. As we reflect on Sacagawea's enduring legacy, we're reminded that her life was not just about surviving, but about thriving, about adapting to a changing world while maintaining cultural integrity, about navigating between worlds while asserting one's identity, and about ensuring that the stories of her people were passed down for future generations. Her legacy is one of quiet strength, unwavering resilience, and a profound commitment to her community and culture. Sacagawea's journey, and the lessons it holds, will continue to inspire those who seek to understand the deep, interconnected relationship between indigenous peoples, their lands, and their cultures. As we move forward, we carry her story with us, a reminder that the past is never truly gone, and that the struggles for justice, recognition, and cultural survival continue today. Thank you for joining us in reflecting on the remarkable life of Sacagawea, a figure whose legacy will forever be woven into the story of the American West, and whose influence will continue to shape the future of indigenous peoples for generations to come.